Board members, we're going to get started here. We can get you ready to go. We want to welcome everyone to our board meeting today. The first order of business, well, let me just take advantage of this opportunity a little bit. First of all, I want to thank you guys, you board members. We have a real busy agenda today and tomorrow. Some things are time certain here and there. We want to be mindful of everything that we have going on with our agenda as we look at our time. Appreciate your commitment to public education and all that you're doing on the Hill. There's a lot of work happening there. Want to recognize staff and the good work they're doing, and thank you. Had the privilege last week and this week to observe their preparation, their execution, and more so their commitment to this board. Just about everything as they talk and express and give input and direction to legislators and to their staff, it's all about the board, this board, and what we represent in our mission, vision, our goals, our strategic plan, and etc. So thank you for all of that work. I know it's been a lot of work. I haven't been able to keep the pace myself. I had to go grab a power nap here and there, and I observed a few of our staff with some wobbly legs from the challenges that have been happening the last little bit. So thank you very much for the work that you're doing there. Our first order of business, we want to welcome Mr. Sean Newell or Newell. I've heard Newell is to our board. The first thing we're going to do is swear him in. So we want to invite him up by the flag here. I don't know if I want to. Okay, this is how it's done. You get sworn in, so you can get officially sworn out. hopefully not. Could you raise your right hand, please? I state your name.
Sean Newell.
Say I.
I, Sean Newell.
Repeat. I, Sean Newell. Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support, obey, and defend.
That I will support, obey, and defend.
The Constitution of the United States.
The Constitution of the United States.
And the Constitution of the State of Utah.
And the Constitution of the State of Utah.
And that I will discharge.
And that I will discharge.
The duties of my office with fidelity.
The duties of my office with fidelity.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have family or anything?
No.
All right, well,
thank you.
We'll get you right in.
Great.
Have you say something?
Board Member Newell, I think the first thing we're going to do here is get you used to that mic. Give you an opportunity to say a few words. I know we didn't ask you to have a speech or anything, but did you want to take a moment? Board Member Newell.
I just wanted to thank everybody for welcoming me with open arms. It's been good to get a chance to speak to most everyone here on the board so far. I've got a few more faces to contact. But I look forward to this experience and being able to serve our state.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on board. We have a good group here. Okay, the first thing on our agenda here is we're going to be talking about, have discussion and action regarding our USBE legislative budget and priorities. So we're going to have we'll have quite a bit of conversation. And then at the end, as we get through the agenda, will be the time when we want to, I'll accept motions from board members, and we'll move action items forward. So again, appreciate everyone's work and preparation and everything that's been happening on the Hill. So first, let's invite Jennifer Thronson, the education specialist, and there's two items here. And board members, if you want to inventory as we get through all of these, if there's any possible action, that would probably be good to keep track of that, because we'll be moving on to other topics.
Thank you, Chair. I'm actually going to start, if that's okay, and introduce why we've asked for an opportunity for Jennifer to address the board related to the budget and legislative statutory item.
So Angie, I know who you are. Will you state your
yes.
name? Thank you.
Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy here at USBE. And Jennifer, do you want to introduce yourself?
Jennifer Brownson, Pre-K-12 Literacy and Library Media Coordinator here at USBE.
This last week, two items, Jennifer will be speaking to two items and wanted to give you the background on the first one. SB 37 is a bill that Senator Milner is running, which was a committee bill of the Education Interim Committee. In October of last year, you may remember that Jennifer presented some information about this program because the committee was determining whether or not they wanted to sunset the program. It was a 3-year pilot program, and that in statute, there was a requirement for the Education Interim Committee to make a recommendation of whether to continue the program or not. The bill resulted from that meeting, and at the time, the board was very favorable and expressed interest in stating to the interim committee that the program should continue. So Senator Milner's bill 37 would continue the program, but now there's a question of how much money should be dedicated to that program. And last week, Senator Hilliard, who's the Public Ed Appropriations Subcommittee Senate Chair, explicitly asked me to bring, and Jennifer, for us to bring this budget item to your attention because the legislature is considering whether to prioritize $250,000 per year to increase the funding or $350,000. So Jennifer is going to speak to the differences and how much that $100,000 difference, how many schools would be served, et cetera.
All right, so just a brief backup on what this grant does. It generally has been used for competitive grants for LEAs to participate in improving their tiered intervention system for students that are experiencing or anticipated to experience reading difficulties. We've been piloting for the last 3 years. We're at a place where we wanted to, the board had that favorable recommendation. We shared the results with the Education Interim Committee, as Angie said, and it's been a kind of favorable outcomes. And so given the stance of how much money should we dedicate to this is always a fun experience that we would like some guidance on. So the initial request for appropriation is a $350 ongoing request that Senator Milner has placed, but the conversation with Senator Hilliard is where is that space that we should be in for the money. Previously, we were getting $125,000 a year over each year annually. So it was a $375,000 appropriation. Most of that went to schools. A small percentage of that went to the independent evaluator that's part of this project to make sure it's actually working and having outcome effects for students. And so given, if you go $250 versus $350, it's basically for every $125,000 you think of, it's about 10 schools. So 12 schools per chance, depending on amounts. So at $350, we could serve about 35 schools. At $250, you're looking at 25-ish schools. My math was much better earlier, but that is more accurate. 25 schools for $250, because the grant allows for up to $10,000 or $30,000 per school. Generally, we engage them in the project for 3 years, so it's about $10,000 a year, or they can spend 20 in the first year and 5 the following years, however they want to make that happen. But the actual legislation is up to $30,000 per school. So depending on where you land will depend on how many schools can participate in the project. They are ran at the LEA level, and the LEA works with the schools to pilot in the actual locations they so choose based on student need and population. One experience, just to kind of give you a perspective of how this works. Cache County, for example, started out in 4 schools trying out this project and had such great success within the first few months. They found local dollars to expand it to all of their elementary schools. That's kind of the hope in this project, is that they will find something that works in their LEA, and then they can use local dollars to scale it rather than the state having to scale it. A lot of opportunities is just they need to find and buy the curriculum that's pretty expensive for this, provide the professional development, and actually implement the program. And so we actually had 2 of the LEAs take it to scale because they saw such great benefits in their school district.
Okay,
So those are
we have
just
a quick question.
options. Yes.
Real fast. Board Member Hanson?
So, reading between the lines here, does Senator Hilliard want us to go lower? Is that, or why is he questioning the 350,000?
It's not so much he was questioning. So in Senate Education Committee, he threw out a number. He thought it should be more than it was. So in the past, it was about 125. So I think in his mind, he was like, let's double that. If it's working, let's go ahead and invest more. The appropriation that Senator Milner and Decoding Dyslexia had requested was more the 350,000. I was told yesterday in House Education Committee, House Ed actually suggested a higher amount than that. So the amount is the variable that we're talking about at this time. People just want to know how much saturation do we want to have in this project in the field.
Well, can I
Okay, follow
continue?
up.
So my question, or my comment is, this, if I understand it right, has been extremely effective. It's making a difference for thousands and thousands of kids. So I would think as much saturation as we could get, we need to have. So I would definitely go with the higher number.
Okay. Board Member Cannon?
Hi, Jennifer, you've come to standards and assessment, and we've talked a little about this, but I wonder if you could just maybe speak to the entire board about where we are as a state in terms of our reading proficiency for students by the time they reach 3rd grade, and how we can justify utilizing this money to benefit our students.
Absolutely. So I think the easiest statistic to keep in mind is we have 1 in 2 kids reading on grade level at the end of 3rd grade. So 49% is the true accurate number, close to 1 in 2 kids. So for this population, we are having a lack of effectiveness of being able to really move children who have experiencing significant reading difficulties. We do a pretty good job at improving in kindergarten and 1st grade. Kindergarten could still have some, but our 1st grade teachers really leverage and move students. But what our data shows is that once they get out of 1st grade, if we didn't get them to being a reader at the end of 1st grade, we are unlikely to change that pathway in 2nd or 3rd grade. We have flat lines in 2nd grade for the last several years. 3rd grade, we have some bump. A lot of that's because it's our accountability year, or at least has been in the past, so people really put in the muscle in 3rd grade. But this project is really a K through 5 project that would allow us, not only if we didn't meet the needs of kids by the end of 3rd grade, to allow services for 4th and 5th graders, which there are no state dollars that are dedicated to 4th and 5th grade intervention, to be able to serve those students, but also that early intervention and prevention that we could do for students who are showing the likelihood that they would have reading difficulties. So that maybe helps give you a landscape of the Utah literacy picture.
Okay. I have 3 more board members that have questions or comments. Board Member Earl?
Hi, Jenny Earl. I have just a couple questions. So this is primarily focused on children with dyslexia, is that correct?
It's just reading difficulties, so
Reading
dyslexia
difficulties in
might be
general.
one. Mhm.
Okay, so that would fall into one.
Yes.
And my understanding, because that's not very much money coming into a school, so that they're given specific training, is this what's happening? So the teachers that are there, the special ed teachers, Is that correct?
It could
Or is these
be
regular teachers?
paraprofessionals, it could be the classroom teacher. The LEA has been deciding who the professionals are that get the training.
Okay.
A lot of it's more the cost. Professional development's usually not the barrier, it's the cost of the curriculum. So a lot of these materials have a
So
significant
they're
cost.
purchasing specific curriculum?
Yes.
Okay, that is I
evidence.
have another question.
Yeah.
So is that, so there's several recommended curriculums, or is there one particular?
No, we have several that we've
Okay.
vetted through a different committee to
Uh-huh.
say what would be high-quality evidence-based interventions that should work for children. In the pilot project, we tried out 3 of those. 2 of them really showed to be highly effective. The third one, due to implementation barriers around you have to do training for 1 year and only work with 1 child a year, sounds not so great in a school system that has 60,000 kids that really could use intervention. And so we are not going to have that one as a recommended product any longer. Not that it doesn't work once you actually get to work with children, but due to the resources, time, and intensity required, it's probably not the best for the school system, is kind of the decision out of that.
And this funding is through a grant program?
It's
Is that
been
what
through
it
the
is?
legislature, but it's a competitive grant for LEAs.
Right, so for an LEA to get it, they would need to apply for the grant?
Yes.
Kind of a thing. And how many schools did you say were receiving this right now?
In the current project, we have between 12 and 14 that have been participating.
Schools, not LEAs, right?
Nope, schools. So we've had 5 LEAs.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Scott Hansen?
Hi, Scott Hansen. I'm all for more of a good thing, so if this is working, I think we should go for as much money as we think we can get appropriated to it. I'm wondering about how to present our case, and wondering, do we have a sense about how the LEAs are selecting schools, about how they're prioritizing?
So in terms of how they did it this time, they went to more their lower performing schools where they had more students who were in need of this intervention. So for example, and they also look at what leaders are going to be supportive of the work. It does take a change in practice. It takes having scheduled time to actually allow for interventions. So it's really coordination with the leadership in schools and then looking at their student population of where is our most intense needs, given what other initiatives are going on at the time too, trying to balance that out. So we don't necessarily, we haven't, and we could dictate what schools might be most appropriate, just due to some of those additional school factors that come into play.
Is there some sort of a graphic maybe that we can present that shows a Pareto chart, something that, here's the schools that are in need of this kind of intervention, and here's what we're serving now, and this is what this money will do?
Sure, absolutely.
For
I mean,
me,
I
think
I
that
could
would
make
be
one. There's
helpful.
not one currently, but.
I understand. Just
Sure.
with the state of our data, is that a good way to present this, maybe?
I think the infographic, so far it's been supportive. So in terms of the bill itself, it passed House Committee with unanimously, as well as Senate Ed Committee unanimously. It's been through the Senate already, so it has positive response from that. I think a lot of it's just going to come down to the appropriation, and Angie would be much more intelligent to speak on that side.
So, Chair, if it's okay?
Okay, yes.
Part of what I wanted to address, also Board Member Hansen's question when she said, I'm trying to read between the lines, why are we bringing this today? Part of it is because of the process and the way the SB 37 is an existing program that then the Education Interim Committee chose to make a committee bill. This board never had the opportunity to prioritize this funding separately as part of the regular process that goes to the governor. And so now, because we didn't bring it to your attention at that time, Senator Hilliard's question in some ways is why didn't we prioritize it back in October as part of our recommendations to the governor? So he wants to make sure that the board also supports this program, in addition to the other appropriation asks that you've had, including the WPU growth, et cetera. And so now the bill is going to make it all the way to the House floor now because it's passed. It'll be held in rules due to fiscal impact, and it will stay there essentially till the last week of the session. And then at the last week of the session, when Executive Appropriations determines their prioritization, it will then be put back on the board if it's funded. And so I think that's part of this also, is to be part of your conversation when you may later today or tomorrow start to prioritize your list, to then also include this $250,000 or $350,000 in that list.
Thank you.
We have 3 more, but I just want to interject a couple things on this. So this is a good thing that they're reaching out to us to make sure that we're included in the process and not excluded moving forward. So that's why this is on here. So
Yep.
great opportunity. to have dialogue and choose to support or not. And then the other part that's really important about this is the way this is put together that's a little different, is it's competitive, that the local board, the LEA's boards and all of their administration clear to the school level have to buy into this as a request, and then they put skin in the game on their end, and this is what the legislature really likes about it, is they participate, and it's just not, here's a program fully funded, and they, based on results, are seeing good results from that. So we, on our end, we're not the judge and jury on facilitating the program to push the water to the end of the road on the education. It just kind of gets it started and creates an opportunity, but that accountability still comes back to whoever goes for the grant, which is not on us, but is on the school and the LEA. Okay, Board Member Lisa Cummins. Then there's 3 more.
Thank you, Chair Huntsman. 2 questions, not related. So so just be prepared.
Okay. Thank you for the buffer.
You and I have talked about phonics before, Tiffany. Is this program part of that phonics implementation?
It is explicit. Typically, the
Okay.
programs require to have an explicit, systematic, cumulative phonics instruction component, yes.
Okay, because I know that elementary schools are themselves.
That is the lack of, that is one of the key areas that these students, especially, for example, dyslexia is a phonological deficit, which is part of these programs also have a strong phonological awareness, which is the additional layer to phonics that we are lacking, and so it's why it's working so well, is we're
Okay.
giving that instruction that we're lacking.
Yep.
As we continue to improve that piece as like just core instruction, we have kids that didn't get that piece that needed for intervention.
Okay, great. Switching gears now.
Okay.
You talked about how certain programs were tying up resources, time, and competitive one-on-one attention. How is this program going to mold into competency-based education as we go towards that? Is this going to be flexible in that nature, or is this going to hinder those individual students moving forward?
I don't think so. So my space is not competency, so my knowledge is like here. Literacy,
Right.
I'm good.
Right.
But in terms of a competency base, this is really, we give the students what they need at the time, and it's flexible. So as soon as you demonstrate, kids are supposed to exit. So actually part of our training from learning from the pilot is helping the LEAs identify what are entry criteria for kids who need this service and what are the exit mechanisms. So one of the pieces of feedback I had to do along with, when I asked them, how do kids get out? The response was they move. And I was like, that's not okay. So we set up some specific criteria of how kids got out of the system, because it's not meant to be what I call jokingly but sincerely a prison sentence. It's meant to be you get what you need, and then we put you back in the least amount of support you need to continue it, being successful.
Right.
And so that is part of the training part that we added to this bill, is to correct those in advance and prevent that from happening this time in some of our schools, because it's really meant to be, when you show proficiency at a high enough level, we're going to slide you back to the less intense model and keeping you in core instruction the entire time, but this is on top of core instruction to get you caught up and close the gap. That's a great question, but in terms of competency, this is not meant to be a lifelong experience. The whole point is so that you can progress at your rate and move out as quickly as possible.
Perfect, thank you.
Board Member Davis,
Thanks for all your work, Jennifer. On this document that we have, it says that about 30% of Utah's K-12 students need some more intensive intervention. And we serve about 10% in special ed, give or take a couple. Am I understanding correctly that this program does not include students who have already been referred for special education services, or can they cross over and participate in this and in a special ed IEP for reading?
Yes, so it depends on what the child needs. So not so much whether they're special ed identified or not. It's if you need this type of intensive intervention and it meets your IEP needs, then they could participate. So for example, in CASH, their special ed students were actually some of the students getting the intervention, and they finally saw growth for those kids that they hadn't seen in years. So they're 4th and 5th graders, and CASH is a very intensive intervention model. And so they start in kindergarten intervening. So the few kids they had left that weren't responding, they tried this program with, and a number of them were in special education, and they were able to remediate that reading need and really close the gap. So it's for anyone who's in need of it, whether they're special ed or not. So there might be some overlap, but it would allow the special ed teacher to potentially serve kids who aren't special ed, but to prevent that need, or allow those special ed kids to be served by another professional to get what their needs are met as well. So it's meant to really just meet the needs of the student rather than the system. It's really about kid-driven, data-driven experiences.
Okay, thanks, Chair. Can I just ask
follow
one
up.
quick question? Am I correct in understanding that this is, instruction is provided by paraeducators? It says,
Potentially. So some of them are professional teachers, but some of them are paraeducators. The programs that we use this time are so scripted that once you receive training, a paraprofessional can handle the lift. It's not meant to just be picked up. There is some training involved. Some were 2 days, some were more than 2 days, but there was ongoing professional development. There was coaching, there was fidelity checks. I was talking to one of the LEAs yesterday, and I said, how did you monitor? They're like, we went in with fidelity checks. We told them if they weren't doing it the right way, we'd come back in 2 weeks, and if they, if we're still struggling, they were going to get some more intensive intervention as the actual person administering the materials, which I think is the lift we need the LEAs to take some of that responsibility. It's great to have materials, but if you don't use them the way that they're actually intended, they're not going to have the benefits for kids. And given this program had 5 times the growth we see as a state, that's why I'm so supportive in terms of just a literacy perspective. We have been highly unsuccessful at moving our students who are in most need of literacy intervention. And this program finally seemed to be kind of breaking that door down to figuring out what works to really move students forward.
thank you.
Board Member Ellis?
Thank you. I just had a question about the budget request. So if I'm understanding correctly, this would be a line item, specific request below the line and of ongoing funding until 2024. So it's not above line, it's all special ed, and not special ed, but specially marked for this program. My question is, there's so many things and only a finite amount of funding. And so as we go through and prioritize different things, I just would like to see some sort of a chart, and maybe this is a request for Scott, as we say we want this or we support this, what does that do to other priorities? Because at the end of the day, we run out of funding, and so I'd like to, we look at things one at a time, and it's like, ooh, yeah. But when you look at it all together, what are we doing to our overall funding?
So, Board Member Ellis, I think we're if we moved off of this today, it would be to put it on the list, and then before our board meetings are complete, or before tomorrow's over with, the hope is that we have a priority list, and then you could see where it's
Thank you.
where it's on there. That's a goal and objective, one of the goals and objectives that we need to have done before we go into our meetings Tuesday for appropriations.
Okay, 'cause
So
this is a
they've
pretty
asked for that.
small amount relative to other things, but
But in the grand scape, it's a lot of things to consider for sure.
That they'll weigh. Board Member Earl?
One more quick question. How many apply and how many are denied
So
currently?
the first time we did it, when we had smaller amount of money, we had 6 LEAs apply. We had 17 that sent in intents to apply, but what they realized is they did not have the infrastructure at the core instruction level to start taking on the intervention level. So those LEAs have spent the last few years trying to get core instruction, what all kids receive, that universal instruction at a high enough quality to really benefit from the other. So of the 6 that applied, we denied 1, just was not going to be a good fit for this grant. The other 5 were approved. They weren't ready to take this grant on. But the intent, when we put out letter of intent, who might apply, we had 17 LEAs respond the first time we put this out, and it was a short turnaround. I think they had 30 days to turn their grant application in, just due to legislative funding and all of those pieces. But with this one, if we know it's coming, I can draft the grant application now, and they can start thinking about it in a much more advanced way than what we've been able to do in the past.
So are the others missing personnel or facilities? or
No,
what
it was
the-
more their core instruction model was not,
Oh.
you were going to have a revolving door. So how we explain it is you can have really great intervention and you can get kids caught up, but as soon as they go back into core instruction, they are going to be what I call the revolving door, because core instruction is too weak, they'll be back into intervention. And so this was supposed to be a proof of concept. If we give kids high-quality intervention, assuming they're getting high-quality core, that they would not need special education referrals, that they would get their needs met. But when you don't have a solid universal
So it's
instruction.
a school buy-in. You're saying
Yeah.
the whole school has to kind of buy into this, even though there's only specific training that goes on with individuals, the whole school has to buy into it?
Because the kids have to, be taken out of class per chance, and they need to have a high-quality experience where the teacher realizes they still need everything else the kids are getting, and they're going to get this on top of it.
Thanks.
Board Member Lisa Cummins?
Thank you, Chair. So just to recap, those schools that are,
I don't know why your light isn't coming on.
but can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Those schools that have accepted the grant, for those kids coming out of the program, they are phonics-based already in the school as a whole, so that they're not revolving, because that.
Yes,
that makes
exactly.
sense.
We need
Okay.
core instruction to be solid, where they're teaching explicit systematic phonics as part of core instruction.
So the whole school has to.
Because otherwise,
Yep.
they just turn around
Yep.
too quickly. After 6 to 8 weeks, they're falling behind again, so.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions. Do you have more to your presentation? More to talk about?
That is it for me.
That is it?
At least for this particular bill, we have one more.
So
Have
the
you two good
second,
stuff? Yeah, go ahead.
yes, thank you. The second item that Jennifer's going to present on is also kind of out of the norm in the sense that it's not a numbered bill yet. And it's regarding preschool programs and general fund money. And so in some ways, you may be saying, well, why does the state board care about this? Because it's preschool and it's general fund money. But many of our LEAs house the preschool programs and are recipients of the money. And so again, we, Jennifer and her team especially, have been asked to provide feedback to Senator Milner on a preschool bill. And we felt like before it gets numbered, that it would be good, again, for you all to be aware of the bill and to understand the fiscal impact and the amount of appropriations. So that's the introduction, if you want to
Yes,
start.
thank you. So this one will be entitled something similar to preschool program amendments. It's really taking in all of the early childhood programs we have under 3 different bills in the past and trying to bring coordination to those bills. So in the resources you have, there's some main purposes for redrafting them as one comprehensive compendium bill. And to really improve coordination, reduce redundancy, align the systems across providers. So you have public school providers, you have private providers, we have the home-based technology providers such as Upstart, all engaged in this work, as well as the relationship between really looking at evaluating this program more effectively. The evaluations have yielded more questions than they have answers. So part of this is to say, if you participate in face-to-face or home-based technology provider, how does that relate to school readiness and your preparation for entering kindergarten? And then as well as, this is a sunset bill as well. So there was funding given for 3 years. The funding is coming to a close. And so I wanted to let you know in terms of impact, what this looks like to our LEAs if this funding is not kind of solicited from general funds. Also, Upstart is part of this amendment. They have been in pilot standing for 10 years. That we are trying to actually move them out of pilot and into kind of just codifying that program. So the stats-wise, in this school year, we have about 1,200 students participating in the program. It is optional for students to participate. In general, they're attending a 2 to 3 hour a day program 2 to 4 times a week. So it's not all day, it's not every day, it depends on the program, but there's some wide variation in what the LEAs offer. This grant increased preschool participation in the participating LEAs by 34%. So we have a third more students coming into preschool right now due to the expansion opportunities provided with the previous funding. If this grant doesn't continue, it's about 150 preschool teachers and staff that would be released from their positions, as well as 49 classrooms closed. We currently have 49 classrooms where all those staff work. We have 11 LEAs in the project, and in the sheet you have those actual LEAs, because it's always helpful if you're interested, is it one of mine that might be impacted, to be able to reach out and understand that impact. And then as well as a lot of the LEAs currently participating are in more rural areas where they don't have a lot of opportunities for other places for kids to go beyond the public preschool setting. And so without those funds, we would kind of see a loss. Currently, we're expending about $5.3 million in preschool expansion. For preschool expansion, they have to be considered a high-quality preschool, deemed by the state board as a high-quality preschool using the tool that we've developed, and that would continue. We want to make sure if they are in preschool, it's a high-quality preschool setting. It's not just a space. And so I just wanted to give you an example of potential impact. So Wasatch School District is one of our participating LEAs, Washington as well. But in terms of just impact, they expanded preschool into all of their elementary buildings as part of their big literacy initiative that they came and talked to you earlier in the year about their performance. They're seeing really good gains in Wasatch. And so if this funding goes away, they'll lose 10 classrooms, all of the staff associated, as well as all the materials they bought to staff those 10 classrooms in terms of desks, chairs, manipulatives, whatever the program might need. And so just wanted you to consider, as we think about this, just knowing if there's not funds, what would happen, just from that kind of perspective. So I will finish my kind of presentation there. There is some data if you're interested in the number of students. It's on the second page participating in the project. So the number on top in the white is just their total preschool population in that LEA. The yellow is how many are currently funded with the dollars that are expiring. And then the bottom is just the number of classrooms that we have as part of that funding. So it's a kind of looking across all of those pieces. So of the 119 available, 49 of those are from this money.
Okay. We've got a handful or more questions or comments, but just for clarity reasons, when you, and I appreciate how you stated it, but when it says they will lose the classrooms, what they'll do is they'll lose funding for those classrooms. And
The room will remain.
Yeah, well, but the
won't be
LEAs
anyone
can
for
choose to
it.
cut other programs and other things to foster early intervention if they choose to keep it up, but it puts that choice back on there. It's not an absolute.
Absolutely. Thank you for
they'll
that clarification.
Yeah, okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
Thank you. May I ask three questions?
You bet. Three questions.
Three questions.
I'm ready.
You might even have a follow-up.
So in your table at the bottom, is this referencing only those programs that are funded through the early childhood? So it's the TANF funding that's running out, is
Yes,
that correct?
Absolutely.
And so then that leads to my second question, which is up on one of your bullet points, you're talking about aligning some of the programs, which would include Upstart. And so the 5.3 million that's in the bottom, is that include Upstart, or is that just the TANF funding that's running out?
It's just the TANF. So we are also, Senator Milner is also asking for the Upstart funding to increase to there was $2 million in TANF given to Upstart as well, so trying to compensate for that. But in our number, that's just the LEA average costs, but not including Upstart. We were given as an institution $9 million for this project annually for the last 3 years. So we're not asking for the full $9 million. We never spent the $7 million we were appropriated every year. We spent an average of 5.3. So going with $6 million gives us some room to expand if we have other LEAs that want to participate in that number.
Okay, so then my last question then is, the bill that's going to be coming out will somehow create an umbrella for all of these early programs. The funding will come through one stream?
So
By
it would
state
be,
funding?
some of it will be general ed. Upstart's been under public education funds, so
Okay.
all of the preschool programming is intended to be under general education funds, except for the home-based technology provider side. That would be out of education funds.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Ellis.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair, for clarifying. That's the point I was going to make, that if we don't support this, the districts still have the choice to
Absolutely.
use funding. So my question on the purpose, I just am concerned, I'm always concerned about government interfering with the private sector. And so in here, you talk about aligning providers. And you have private listed, and so I just wanted to see if you could give some more clarity. This is only those using this technology, and how do you become one of those?
Gotcha. So in terms of privates, that's more like our private child care centers. So
Okay.
we have the
So
home-based
it's still
technology
government,
provider.
it's not-
It's Department of Workforce Services, the Office of Child Care, what they oversee. Their providers are also eligible if they have the right certification levels and they get to quality status or want to work towards quality, just like our LEAs, to participate in the grant project.
Okay, thank you. And I do have concerns. I know a lot of people that provide preschool in their home for other people, and any time we expand through the government mechanism, it hurts their private businesses, and so I'm always wary to do this.
Board Member Belknap.
I appreciate Brittany's question on the Upstart, but we're asking for 6K plus Upstart. How much is Upstart?
Upstart currently gets just under 10 million. I believe they're going to ask, 10 million of regular education funds, 2 million was TANF. So they were getting close to 12 million. I think the ask is going to be 13 million.
Okay, may I follow up,
Yes.
Chair, on the finances?
Kind of.
Okay, so financially, tracking this, are these students, whether if they're coming out of TANF money or if they're coming out of general ed, how do we make sure that we don't cross-mingle those kids?
So what we're going to be doing within this alignment project, that is part of this, is allowing us to look at different types of services, what they received, and then their SSID is going to be tagged to whatever program they went to, so we can follow up. So they might go to Upstart and participate in a face-to-face preschool. We'll be able to have those distinguishers, so Upstart would register them. We'd also have them in the private and flag them in both so that we can run data. So for example, Upstart has 20 to 30% gains for kids that participate longitudinally for years, showing all the way into fourth grade. In one of the studies we looked at, those benefits are persisting and lasting. We'd like to see if our preschool programs with face-to-face preschool are also persisting. So this will help us to kind of coordinate those systems, because we'll be evaluating privates, publics, and the home-based technology provider as part of this bill. It will be under the housing of USBE.
Okay, I have more questions, but I'll
Okay.
let someone else go first.
Well, wait, what, all right, we'll put you back in line. Okay. Board Member Linda Hansen.
Are you sure, Laura?
I was going to see if you had a follow-up, but,
This
well,
is it's a 40-page bill, so there will be questions, I am sure.
A couple of questions for you. So the TANF funding is going away? I mean, because I was there when John Pierpont offered to help us with funding. So why is it going away? Is it federally it's going away, or
No.
he's just saying, I'm going to use it for something else?
This was spent from the TANF reserves, and we've exhausted our TANF reserves. So at one point, the state was very heavy in the TANF funds
Yeah,
they
he
had
said he had a
available, and they
lot.
needed to spend down. So this was one of the projects that they dedicated a sizable, it was 27 million over 3 years to, and that money is no longer, there's not that reserve anymore, because from what I saw in the audit, they're doing a better job of spending their money and not keeping such a vast amount of extra. So it's just in terms of reserves, it's been expended at this point.
Okay. And the other question has to do with other preschools. So these aren't all the preschools in the state, because Granite School District runs an intensive preschool program that isn't on this list.
So they are in one of the other grant projects, so they're in the pay-for-success model and the results-based contracts, which is part of this, but in terms of things that are changing, that part's not actually changing. So those grants are already funded through $3 million through the general fund, so that's not an additional request. Those are already things that are in statute and were redone last year. So Granite is involved in this bill, if you want to think of it that way, but in terms of the $6 million, they'd be eligible for some of those dollars if interested, but currently they're not in this particular one that needs to be refunded.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Davis?
I have two questions. How many, it says 11 LEAs are participating. How many applied? And what's the philosophy for continuing? So is the philosophy, let's spread the wealth and give other LEAs an opportunity? Or since Wasatch already has 10 classrooms up and running, let's keep them receiving this grant?
So
after year?
currently, the way it's been operating is we've had anywhere between 9 and 14 LEAs over the 3 years that we've had the project. So we had a couple drop off this year. TANF has been challenging financially for people to track. You have to have 100% documentation. It's been a little burdensome on the LEAs. So we had a couple drop out this year, more because of that. But in terms of, it would be to maintain what we have for now. Over time, we left a little cushion because we're averaging 5.3 million, left some cushion to allow other LEAs to join us. We've never had to turn anyone down as long as they were deemed quality. We've had folks that weren't quality yet, and so they're in the Getting to Quality Grants program, which is also part of this bill, but it's been in place and is not a shift. It's already in action. It's just bringing the bills together. So you're going to see some things that I haven't put in here, which is the Becoming Quality Grants, because that's already funded and established. So there's 3 main components. There's Becoming Quality, there's expanding schools that are quality, and then there's the Upstart part. So you'll see 3 kind of programs within this one large system.
And that segues to my second question, actually. Why the differentiation between the 2 funds, and why is Upstart not included with the other groups?
So Upstart they participated in Becoming Quality, they participated in HQSRE, which is the expansion for a while. With this consolidation of funds, it gets a little complicated because this has been general fund added, but Upstart's been funded out of education funds. So you'd be commingling, it just gets more complicated, and Angie can definitely speak more to that, but having multiple funding sources go to a preschool provider when they've already been education funded and commingling that with general funds just seems to complicate the system a little bit from my understanding.
So I think that, just to supplement what Jennifer said, she was accurate, that part of what this bill will be doing, the bill that we're talking about that hasn't been numbered yet, is there's portions of this program that are currently administered by us, which is the money that goes to our LEAs. That will now go under the School Readiness Board and under DWS. And we'll have input on that. There'll be a seat at the table, but it will now be a DWS, School Readiness Board, kind of oversight program. Upstart is a contract that we have with a vendor every 5 years, and it is run out of our office. We enter into the contract. So therefore, education fund money can be used for Upstart because this board, you have oversight over that program, and we run the program. Other preschool programs right now, portions are run out of here, portions are run out of DWS, and the idea of this bill is to put them all under DWS and have the funding be general fund money. But part of the reason why Senator Milners and others want you all to be involved and understand is because it does include our LEAs, our school districts who run these programs would be impacted if the funding runs out. But hopefully that helps differentiate why Upstart is education fund money, because it's run by us and you all have oversight. The other preschool programs will be general fund money and under DWS.
And there is a line in the bill that encourages LEAs to partner with Upstart as part of their programming if they so choose. There's not a mandate, but they are welcome to partner with them as leveraging, seeing the results of Upstart for the last decade have been so strong, if that helps at all.
Yeah, there's got to be a follow-up there.
Thank you. You could feel the wheels turning in my head.
Yeah, they're squeaking clear over here.
They are. I'm gonna chew on that, and I'll get back to y'all.
All right. Board Member Scott Hansen.
Just 2, I think, quick questions. One, what about Head Start? How does that fit into this whole program?
Absolutely.
The second one, maybe you can think about it and answer at the same time. So is DWS going to be the watchdog kind of over all these preschool programs, and that will shift? I know we've been asked to do some of that up till now. Is that the
So,
direction
great
we're
question. So Head Start, some of them are already embedded in our LEAs, so those ones would be funded as LEA providers. So for example, Davis and Salt Lake had a Head Start embedded, and they were funded through the USBE dollars. Head Starts that are not in an LEA are funded through the private side. So they're eligible, and they're actually in the grant, several of them right now, that have participated. So Head Start is part of this story. It just, because they have to either be embedded in a public or standalone as a private, they're kind of, they're not listed clearly out because they fall in both houses. And then second question
Who's-
escaped me. I was
who's
worried
the-
about Head Start.
Who's the watchdog, I guess, over all of this?
So
and
with this kind of
coordinating all
transition, so the Becoming Quality Grants has always been under the School Readiness Board. So it used to be in the Governor's Office of Management and Budget, I think is what it's called, GOMB, and then it got moved to DWS last year with the session change in the bill. This would allow, the expansion grants were run by both DWS and ourselves as kind of the monitoring agency. This would put that under DWS, and the School Readiness Board would be over kind of spending the dollars, determining who gets them and all of those things. Upstart would still remain under us because it's coming out of education funds. So basically, it's the funding source is tied to who's kind of overseeing it. General funds would be DWS. Anything public education funds would be USBE. It's the way it's developed at this time.
So still no one organization kind of overseeing?
No,
kids who
the
are
Upstart
eligible?
piece is because it's education funds, we can't give that over to DWS. It would be a nuance that we have not done before. And I don't know the space we'd want to enter.
Just one follow-up,
Yeah.
if that's okay, Chair. So,
Yes.
what about determining the best fit for these children? Is there any way, I mean, I was involved with the Head Start program up in Ogden, and it seemed that some of the children may have been going into a program that was run by an LEA that was less comprehensive than the Head Start program. I'm not sure that that was always the best fit, so there was this competition. Is there something that's trying to deal with that?
Well, a couple of things. We always leave it up to the parent. That is, especially at this age, parent choice is where we definitely want to leave that. The other thing, we're improving coordination between Head Start and the LEAs. It's kind of has been us versus them mentality, and so we've been orchestrating some kind of working groups and trying to connect Head Start with their local preschool programs, because there are some students that come to the public side that really would be better served in Head Start, and vice versa. So I know Head Start and Granite, for example, have that partnership of, you know what, we wouldn't be the best one to serve you. We'd suggest you go to Granite, and Granite saying, we may not be the best to serve you. You might want to go to Head Start, and having that coordinated effort. We still have a ways to go in that, but it is part of the conversation, because it really is about who is the best one to serve this student based on what the parent and family wants. They would never deny. I know Head Start has to deny based on certain things. But our public education programs, if there are spots, they wouldn't deny that student from coming, even though a different provider might be a better option for that student.
Thank you.
Board Member Belknap, did you remember what it is? or-
Oh, I wrote them down.
Okay.
Okay, so piggybacking on Elisa, do we have any home-based programs who have been accepted to this grant program as of yet?
Just Upstart has always been our home-based technology provider.
But I'm talking about a private sector home-based.
Oh, like a home?
Uh-huh.
No, because you have to fall under the Office of Child Care's
You have to-
certification.
Okay.
So it's not like a basement preschool in somebody's house.
Okay,
No.
all right, so we really are stepping on that. Okay, and number two, it goes back to Cindy's question. The question I had also is about Upstart getting money through this funnel and the other preschool programs going through here and TANF. But my question is there a way to merge these or to get Upstart money to move over and come out of general fund? Is that what you were asking? Me too. So,
13 million out of general funds may be a challenge. It's been out of public ed for the last decade, not saying it's not possible. And if that's something we want to look into, general funds definitely doesn't have the amount of money, from what I understand, to be able to take on that kind of lift. Even 6 million is going to be a heavy lift to get out of general funds for just supporting the public programs we have now. It might be something we want to continue to looking at how that might be served. Did I say okay?
Okay. Board Member Ellis?
Earlier, you mentioned that several programs had dropped out because the reporting was so intense and specific. Will this proposed bill lighten that?
Yes.
Can you explain?
Most of it was, I'm going to take the blame. So this program came to me, and I was like, okay, our budget to DWS had to have all these budget categories. We must need the same thing from the LEAs. We didn't need those, but that's how we established the program, and that's how we led the program. So after a couple of years, I was like, you're telling me we could have made this easier on ourselves? So when we got the kindergarten supplemental enrichment program, which is also TANF funds, we did a flat rate and said, here's your money, here's the things you can spend it on, have a nice day. And it's been much more simplified and eased. So I'm total ownership of not knowing what we didn't have to do, and I made it too heavy. And so we will fix that for sure,
So
given
you're
moving
on
forward.
with that.
It was on me. I will take that blame. The poor LEAs. I just
you.
think I had to hit all of the subject codes that they require, and we didn't, so I learned later.
Thank you.
Yep.
Board Member Earl?
All right, this is kind of maybe a philosophical question. Again, in our strategic plan, we talked about one of our goals is early intervention. I guess I'm wondering where those boundaries are, once again, because if we're talking early intervention, are we talking K-3? Are we talking birth to K? What is our relationship with some of these things? I'm just trying to understand. There's a number of bills that address preschool, which really is being interpreted. It's not 3 and 4-year-olds. The preschool that's being addressed is after you're born, and when you get to. Do you know what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to understand is our relationship, because quite honestly, I'm looking at this amount, and I think, wouldn't that $5.3 million go to do some incredible things for this reading program we just talked about? And not that we don't want children prepared. So I'm just trying to understand where those parameters are.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And
It's
where could we make that same progress and dedicate it to the professionals we're already working with?
Yeah,
And so
and-
I just, it's kind of a philosophical question, but I'm trying to understand as I'm reading bills and I'm reading things saying, where does this end and where do we start, and how far down into the home do we go before
Absolutely.
we are competing? When you're able to provide funding for preschool children at no cost for parents to go in and have that versus, your neighborhood, little preschool, you are, I don't know, and I know we need prepared children, but at the same time, where does that boundary stop? I guess that's what I'm asking.
Good question.
So,
And just from a high level, within the strategic plan, like you said, it is one of the prongs. One of the strategies is to increase access to preschool for families. One of the other strategies is to increase parent engagement, and that's more that birth to 5 and maybe beyond that, obviously. Space, I believe that one of the ones you approved is the access to high-quality preschool, to increase access, so it does fit in with the strategic plan. The complication is the board constitution at the state level is K through 12 when it comes to what you're really garnered with the charge of. Preschool has been part of our programming for a number of years as we support. So it is an awkward space, so I think that's what you're grappling with as well. Given these are general funds, it's not so much competing against the reading dollars would be highly unlikely to come out of general funds just due to the space that they're in. Those would be more likely to come out of education funds. So they're not competing in that way. If this becomes a public fund, or not public fund, public education piece, then we would have, that might be a bigger deal for you guys to decide around what's the priority, where do we want these funds to come from? Because this is not an education fund, it is a general fund concept. So hopefully that helps I have been doing preschool here since I came, and it is a complicated story.
And may I supplement to what Jennifer just stated, is the bill is explicitly going to limit this to the year before kindergarten. So the programs we're talking about right now would not include any birth to up to 4. The definitions in the bill that we've been seeing that will likely be part of the bill would limit it to that 1 year prior to kindergarten.
I'm not sure who the board member is.
I'm not sure who the board member is, but it's seat 41. Is somebody trying to get into the conversation? That would be Board Member Lear. Did you push your button? Are you want?
I did push my button.
Okay, you are present.
Did I push your button?
Now you're in. You're good. Board Member Lear.
I'm trying to, and this is kind of thinking about what Jenny's saying and Lisa were saying. I understand Head Start has a component for low-income students, or a preference for low-income students. would this bill have any preference for low-income students, which, to me, takes off that competitive discussion somewhat, because these are students, children who probably otherwise couldn't afford preschool. And so I wondered what part that economic
It
status
absolutely
plays
does.
in this.
So to be an eligible student for this project, you have to be economically disadvantaged and have one of the risk factors identified. So it's things like having a mother who had their first birth before 18, having parents who didn't graduate from high school, some of those risk factors. So, or you have to be an English learner. So those are the two just discrete eligibility categories: economically disadvantaged and a risk factor, at least one, or EL. So it does limit who this funding is really targeted for.
Just to follow up.
You bet.
And those would be the only children that qualify for this, or they just, is there a?
That's it. It wouldn't allow
So
others.
Is it, in your experience, having worked, this would be primarily children then that otherwise
wouldn't
couldn't
afford it.
at all to attend
Absolutely.
preschool? Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing any other comments on this. We have, oh, there we go. I was not being totally truthful here. Board Member Bolter.
I just wanted, how are you checking the qualifications? Because I know some of my friends who are not any of those priorities, and their child attends a four-year-old preschool, so I'm just wondering.
So in terms of currently, the TANF eligibility, they have to fill out the federal form for free and reduced lunch to prove their status for being economically disadvantaged. And you have to be at the 200% of poverty level to participate. So most likely, I don't know if those are the friends you're talking about, they have to fill out those forms. Not saying there's not other slots in preschool, but the ones that we are funding for expansion come out of those dollars, have to meet that eligibility.
Which other LEAs can choose to still fund, and
Yeah,
then
so-
you can get in there, they can choose to say, you know, we really want 50% this way, a portion this way, it's not an absolute.
And you can see on the chart, 2/3 of the population is not eligible TANF students. The other third are the students that fall into that eligibility category of 200% below poverty level.
Okay, well, we've spent some good time on this one. Good conversation. Thank you. Most likely we'll come back to this under a board motion, so be close, and as we craft a good motion, you might be required for some more participation. Okay, next. Thank you, Jennifer. We'll invite Christy Walker, Education Specialist. We're going to talk about school safety.
Yes. You want me to, or you want to? Okay, sure. And while Christy is coming up, Chair, do you mind if I introduce why this is being presented to you today also?
You bet.
Tomorrow, as you may recall, one of your top priority, budget priorities is the 30 million ongoing and the 66-ish million one-time for school safety. And tomorrow, Christy Walker, who she'll introduce herself in just a moment, will be supporting Representative Ward and others in presenting that budget priority to the Public Ed Appropriation Subcommittee. So we felt it would be important for you all to see what will be presented as part of that appropriation request. So.
So you're going to turn that mic on, and then I'll turn it on here. Will you repeat or restate your name and?
Yes, Christy Walker, School and Student Safety Specialist.
Okay.
All
That's the
right.
PowerPoint. Sorry.
Oh, you're good.
Okay. Do you want to start with that one?
Oh, sure.
And then I'll see if I can get the actual PowerPoint going.
Beautiful. Thank you. So House Bill 120 was a creation out of the Utah School Safety Advisory Committee. Representative Ray Ward was a member of that committee and wrote the bill to include initiatives and programs and things that were felt by all of the constituents as key priorities. So as you can see, the School Safety Advisory Committee had several partner agencies They're listed there, Utah State Board of Education, Department of Public Safety, Division of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, UETN, Fire Marshal, Governor's Office. And so each of these groups that you see represented here also have subcommittees. Oh, looks like.
Yeah. and you
Oh, you're
bring that
good.
closer to you.
Oh, you got it. Okay. Finagle. Okay. So each of these agencies had subcommittees in which they were charged with going back and providing information to their subcommittees and then gathering feedback and bringing it back to the School Safety Advisory Committee, creating that loop of communication. You're awesome. Thank you. So one of the things that we did at the very beginning of this committee is we looked at current stats across the state, some of the issues that we were seeing pop up in certain areas. Some of the things that we see in large amounts is bullying and suicide. Those are also the two top topics that Safe UT addresses on a daily issue. So you can see there that it is approximately 1 in 5 students across the state that struggle with any one issue at a given point in time. These are Safe UT stats. Safe UT is also a member of the School Safety Advisory Committee. And as you can see, December 2018, they experienced almost a triple amount in tips. And so there is absolutely a growing need for help seeking and access to mental help. Currently, they are in 100% of our high schools and 100% of our middle schools. So when we think about school safety, we want to look at it as a complete picture. And so I want you to think about this in terms of from the outside in, because there's so many levels of school safety. We want to be sure that we address each piece. So you can see at the bottom level there, we've got our state committees, we've got state agencies, and then we have our communities and our subcommittees and our districts. And then we have our school safety and support teams, which are a group of individuals that are part of the program within this bill to collaborate and talk about local resources and interventions for students. And then parents, and including parents in that conversation, and then students themselves, teaching them how to cope and seek help and access all of these supports. So the purpose here is to ensure physical and emotional safe school environments for all students, and that is through construction and design as well as emotional and behavioral supports. So the what, and we'll go through the funding on the top bullet there pretty quickly because we'll get into that in a couple of slides. So the request for $30 million is for an increase in mental health and school safety personnel. The $66 million is to increase structural safety measures. And then the creation of the school teams creates that collaborative system at a local level. So this is creating, again, that communication loop as far as what does this student need to be successful. And then the Department of Substance Abuse and Mental Health, the Department of Public Safety and the Utah State Board of Education are going to work collaboratively at a state level to be sure that we're giving technical support, any sort of curriculum or training for the school teams, and making sure that they understand the processes that are best practices. The why. I feel like at some level we don't really need to discuss the why, because ultimately it's to create safe school environments for every student. But we want to increase parent and community engagement. We want to increase that flow of communication. We want to have our at-risk students be able to connect to resources, reduce bullying, establish problem solving, and reduce suspensions and disciplinary events. So the 8 conditions of school safety, this is part of the framework that was established through this committee. So each of these pieces will be touched through this bill. There isn't a single one that was not addressed in some form, whether it's through curriculum or through adding resources or funding to make sure these things are happening. So the funding asked, the $66 million, is for building and construction improvements. This will be distributed to the LEAs through a base plus calculation. And then the $30 million is for mental health and school safety personnel, and this is also distributed through a base plus. And the estimated base would start at $55,000 per LEA. The $1.5 million and the $415,000, these are for the resources and intervention technology tool. This allows schools to track what they are doing for students as far as interventions and giving them access. And then the $415,000 is to help continuous improvements and also the tool support. The $65,000 is for us to be able to provide the curriculum and technical support for students, and that will be utilized as the program funding. $150,000 for 2 FTEs. This is one through the Department of Public Safety. This is a public safety liaison. This individual will help create those community connections between schools and their local law enforcement agency to ensure that training is happening between those two entities, that it's a healthy functioning relationship, and supporting them in any way they can. The school-based mental health specialist, this is one that would also be a resource in helping people access community supports for mental health services, and also doing training and supports at the local level. Our performance measures are creating a statewide intervention and resources tool, as we discussed. Implementation goals will include increasing student access to social emotional support personnel. And then also the improvements on local goals for student safety will be determined by each LEA, because we know each of them are so different in their needs. We want to be sure that they can address their own specific building needs. The timeline for implementation, this is where we get into the programming. So the first piece of it is the meeting of the school safety program. This is the state school safety program in which the State Board of Education, DPS, and DSAMA, with those 2 FTEs that we talked about. We will be working collaboratively to ensure that the curriculum meets all the needs. We've already started meeting. The school climate and safety survey has already been distributed to administrators, building administrators. So we're excited to get that data back in 3 weeks. And then we will continue to create a framework for the teams at the school level, get them trained, and then support them as the tool rolls out, and we're able to track that data as well. Okay, lots of information in a short amount of time, so I'm sure you have questions. Thank you.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
Thank you, Chair. Christy, I have, many LEAs have already used their own funding to, what's the word that they're using right now? Do the hard.
Right, to harden facilities.
Yes, harden facilities.
They use their capital to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Does this 55,000 replace that? Does that add to it? If LEAs have already used it to harden their facilities, is that money given to the LEAs? What is the criteria to get it and not get it?
So the criteria, the way the formula is currently is it allocates funding to each LEA with a base amount, and then based on WPU. And so they would present a plan to determine what exactly they would use the funds for, and then they are guaranteed that certain amount.
Okay, so it has nothing to do with what they've already done then? Okay.
No, not right now.
Okay. Board Member Lear?
Thank you, Chair. I have a new mantra about bills that are funded like this, and I asked this to Scott about an earlier, Scott Jones about a bill earlier, so I'm going to ask you, I've watched for 40 years, we never get what we ask for. And so I'm wondering about your Plan B or your Plan C. And because I would hate personally to see all this money go for technology and bars on the windows, and everybody jumps and says, no, we don't mean bars on the windows, it's just an example, and none of it go for the healthcare professionals. So what's your Plan B when we get half of this?
So right now, the 66 million is separate from the 30 million for the school safety and mental health personnel. So that would go into a restricted fund only for that purpose. And so same with the building and the hardening of facilities, they would need to present a plan. And so to answer your question, if they happen to award us with less funds, I think we can still make a world of difference. However, the amount of strain that we currently see on students and teachers, I think that needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed aggressively with full funding.
A short follow-up to that.
Yes, please.
So what's your sense of, sometimes there is really built-in and very solid support for these kinds of proposals, and I know Representative Ward has been working on this for a long time with a varied group of people. Do you sense that there is strong support for getting very, very close to this amount of money?
Yes, I
Good.
do. I feel like our stakeholders have been very supportive, and we've had a lot of buy-in, and we've heard from a lot of voices. So I do feel like the spirit of the bill is absolutely supported, and the numbers, I think people will need to consider and see for themselves.
Right, okay. That's helpful. I very much support this effort. I feel like we are so often left with too little money to do something meaningful, and then we're responsible for not doing something meaningful. So I think that's a frustration. Thank you
Yes.
for giving me your opinion.
Thank you.
Board Member Earl?
Yes, thank you. So I'm back to the philosophical again, and that is, at what point, how much do we want to be doing? And I know some things need to be done, I'm not suggesting that at all, but I'm just wondering, at what point, I mean, do we become a full service, what everybody wants, and then parents, we'll just send them home to you at night, but we'll take care of every element, you know? I think there's some balance in this. I'm not necessarily saying, you know, that we don't have some component to it, but I worry that we're racing towards where, I don't know about the schools in everyone else's area, but there's a lot of schools in my area that don't have extra space, or they have very limited space, and yet we're adding on more facilities, more people, more, you know, more personnel. And then I want to know, well, that was just me speaking, but my question is what is the increased parent and community component? And I'm specifically meaning families, because when families own their relationship with one another, you're going to see some of these changes take place. I'm not sure I see that here, but maybe I missed it. So could you speak to that?
Absolutely. So the beauty of the school teams really is gaining a farther reach. So we know that law enforcement and local mental health agencies can do things with families and with students and in the community that schools maybe don't have all of the resources to do. And so by being able to have parents and students attend treatment or come to classes where they gain skills, or they're attending classes where they can improve communication within the home. This is something that, because of the importance of the parent role, these individuals and the communication and the access to the resources will increase our ability to pull in more family collaboration and more parent education.
And then I do have a question. Your school safety climate survey, what are we using? Are we still deciding that? Are they still deciding that, or do we have that picked out?
So it is something that we're going to finalize as far as how, but there are currently LEAs that have created their own. And so we're looking at something like that because we want to be able to house that data and we want to be able to make it accessible for all of the LEAs so they can utilize it at their level. And so that is something we're currently working on.
So are we looking at making one or a variety with similar statistics to be pulled from?
So we do want the flexibility for LEAs that currently have one to be able to continue doing what's working. But we will work with them in a way where we are still able to gain the state data that we need and they can still utilize the tool that works for them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Board Member Linda Hansen.
So what I like about this is that it brings all these agencies together. So often we work in our own little silos and we don't work with each other. And that, when we got this committee together and started working together, the first couple of meetings were kind of like that. And then we kind of all gelled and now we're all working together. And I think that's the beauty of this, is that we're getting all these agencies working together on the same page. And that's what this bill does. And I think it will move that same system, so to speak, down to the LEAs. I think the LEAs will understand that, and they'll start working also with their local agencies. And so it will be a good collaborative effort, and we won't all be working in our own little silos.
And Board Member Ellis.
I am in full support of making sure that our schools are a safe environment, but philosophically, I disagree with this bill. It's too expansive. It steps on the toes of families too much. The government's taking too much of a role in personal lives, in my opinion. I also really think that we need to take a harder look. I know it's kind of mentioned, but the local communities are doing excellent things. I have been so impressed with some of the safety measures that have been put in place locally. The decisions have all been made locally, and I know that that's made mention of in here, but I feel like that needs to have a much larger role than it currently has in this particular draft.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
You mentioned data. What data would they be collecting?
So as far as the data tool,
Well, you mentioned that you wanted to streamline and better acquire data from the parents and the family and everything. What data would you be seeking?
So the school climate survey helps us gauge what's currently happening within schools with the mental health services, what advances they've made for building and construction improvements, if they have access to local law enforcement and those supports. And so that sort of data is going to be part of the programming. We're also going to continue to look at incident data and resource and intervention data as well.
Okay, so trying to be more specific, are you getting any more intrusive into what's going on in the family home, in the environment, the mental health status in the family home at all?
No.
Okay.
No. The school climate survey would be anonymous.
Any other questions from board members? Board Member Davis.
Just a quick question. Were school nurses part of that conversation at all? And to what extent, and how does that play into the personnel component, if at all?
School nurses have absolutely been a part of the conversation. And as part of the mental health personnel, they were addressed. And we know that their student to professional ratio is upwards around 1 to 4,000. And so that funding could be utilized for school nurses.
Okay, thank you. And then just kudos. I know you pulled together a lot of different agencies and worked extensively over the last year, getting input from a lot of sources to be able to craft this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Superintendent Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is actually, if I may, a question of clarification for Board Member Ellis, so I'm glad you came back in. I would like Christy to address this, but it was your concern about local input to the safety measures on the 66 million side. I concur with you. I've seen some amazing things happening in schools as I've been out and about, use of technology and kind of how checking parents into schools, et cetera. So I just want to get clear on that local piece. Christy, can you address, like, what is our role in that? We're not, it's my understanding, we're not dictating what that looks like, right? So can we have a little bit more dialogue about that? Because I'm not trying to convince you, Board Member Ellis, just trying to understand in the bill so that we can address it with Representative Ward in terms of where you see too much oversight on the physical side of it, physical safety.
On the building and construction piece?
Yeah, the 66 million that we're asking for. So in the bill itself, is there anything that is dictatorial, restrictive, or in any way dictates at the local level what that has to look like, or how wide open is that? And maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're asking, Board Member Ellis.
So to address that question first, and then if there needs to be clarification, please. So as far as any sort of dictation or specific elements that are going to be required, there's nothing written in the bill. And we know that every building looks different, every student population looks different. And because of that, we want to be sure that LEAs have the opportunity to present their own plan stating, here's our building needs. And so right now, there is nothing surrounding us telling them what they can and can't do, as long as it's within the realms of student safety and building improvements.
Board Member Ellis, did that?
Board Member Ellis, did that answer your question? or
Well, I
one
didn't
of your
really have a
concerns?
question. I mean, we won't agree because there's so many components in this bill all wrapped into one that go philosophically against my
Okay.
persuasion. However, but I appreciate that, but when I've seen how much has already been done, and they can't retroactively be paid for what they've already done. And so a lot of the schools are already at a place, and so are we asking for too much funding for this? Because a lot of districts have already taken care of this. And so it just seems like that's restrictive in and of itself, because in my district, I mean, one of my districts, but my home district, they have put in a great amount of expense currently to have police officers in every single school, all these things that are requested or recommended in this initiative. And, you know, so I'm sure there's still something they could think of doing, changing all the windows to bulletproof glass or something, bars on the windows, but, you know, it just seems like a lot of funding being requested when a lot of districts have already taken great measures, and they could use that funding for something that they need, and it is restrictive when it says it's for something, and they've already taken those measures.
So just to clarify on how that 66 million came about, to when we looked at the number of buildings across the state, and we took a round number of about how much it would take for a building to construct a secure single point entry, it worked out to be about $250,000 for one single point entry in one building. And in order to make that happen, we needed to start $164 million for the first year. And so we are really just asking for not quite what we feel is needed to help meet some of those needs.
Board Member Earl?
Yeah, I had a question on how many years has the Safe Utah app been in place?
So it began under a different
Title or?
a different program, and then Safe UT took ownership 2 years ago.
2 years
I
ago.
think they're getting into their third year now, and so part of the increase too is that more and more schools are getting on board. but we are absolutely seeing an increase in usage in current existing schools.
Okay, so it's only been in place really about 2 years, right? So we would naturally, probably even for the next 2 to 3 years, as youth are more familiar and such, we're going to see an upkick in that because that's just what.
Absolutely.
Right, there's just knowledge of it. So kind of like 911, the more you use it, yeah. So
And-
it's just knowledge being out there. Okay, I did have another question, but I can't remember what it was. I should have wrote it down, so.
Okay.
Oh, I was just going to make a quick statement. I know that, and it looks like you've built this into this, one of the key things for states is to have the same language. Everybody's using the same language when they're talking safety. So, and it looks like that component's built into this. Am I understanding some of this language right? Critical response protocols would be the same, not that they're the same in every district, but the language would be the same, so that if they had some kind of a crisis, shooter, whatever, management crisis, then they would be able to talk the same language, and there would be, so am I understanding that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Board Member Lear?
Thank you, Chair. To your point, Board Member Ellis, various districts have different tax bases, they have different available funding, and I personally am not bothered that some districts will benefit from this more than others. I think there are some that are desperately in need and they don't have any kind of extra discretionary, call it whatever you need to. But I feel like as the overseers of a community of the state children, and that's stated a little strongly, but those who supervise the system, I think that we want every child to be as safe as he possibly can, and if that means some districts need it more than others, I personally am fine about that. Secondly, I think, and this reflects one of the districts I represent, but sometimes schools are the very safest places that children can be. And I always want to remember that in supporting those schools, those situations where and children spend much more time at schools in some districts, communities than others. And I think I really want to be aware of that and as we look at this funding and the necessities in various districts and areas, because I want all children to be safe, and kind of connected to that, in some areas, in some districts, parents can have it's sort of a luxury to be able to opt their children, to homeschool their children, or opt them out of part of the school day. Some parents, or single parents especially, don't have that opportunity, so that means children are at school. And I want those to be welcoming places as well as safe places. And that doesn't, without some resources to do both, those two desires are not always, they're sometimes mutually exclusive. Thanks.
I'm not saying you're the comment, but I just want to take advantage of the opportunity here a little bit. The reason we're talking about this is, Angie, correct me if I'm wrong, this was one of our asks from previous board meetings ago, correct? And then we also have been a part of this particular committee, and with all these other entities and agencies and the governor's office, even a lot of legislators, that they see this one-time money opportunity, and this is a little bit odd or unique that they're reaching out and going to spend money on capital that's normally a capital expenditure for an LEA, and not limit it to just districts, but it's all schools in there. And so we either have our fingerprints on it or not at all in a unique capital improvement where we're leaving it up to the LEAs to decide what they're going to do, whether it's something physical that you can see, or something that's better in communication systems, or lighting or camera, whatever it is. And that's where it's purposely has been placed, so we don't have a lot of strings attached to this particular funding, and it's one time, correct? And so just to kind of bring this back in, we have a new board member here that while we're having this conversation is because it was one of our asks, as this is. and priorities. So I'm not seeing any others, so let's dive right into the next piece, but I want to come back to this let's talk about a few more things. If we're going to take action on any of this, let's start taking, we'll start taking action at 2 o'clock. Well, I'll start receiving action at 2 o'clock. So, Angie, we don't have a lot of time. We have 20
Yes.
minutes for...
I will hurry as quickly as I can, and Jeff, if you'd like to come join me, Chair, if that's all right. Just quickly, in the last Standards and Assessment Committee meeting where there was a discussion of Rule R277404, there was a discussion of how the opt-out requirements apply to CTE skills certification assessments, and how there's been confusion about when parents request an opt-out for one of those assessments, that it ends up impacting the student's ability to get the certification. And the Standards and Assessment Committee had a discussion about requesting or asking staff to request legislation to add, if you see at the bottom of this document, an exception to the opt-out that states subsection 9A does not apply to a CTE skill certification assessment, but the committee, it looks like, did not actually take a motion on that. So we codified essentially what it sounded like was the request of the committee, although not formalized through a motion. And so this is just to get your approval for staff to work with a legislator on a bill that would exempt the CTE skill certification assessments from opt-out, because under the language in code, technically they apply. However, if you don't take the assessment, it impacts the student negatively, and they usually don't know until after the time has passed. So if you would approve that, then we will work with the legislator, and I don't know if you want to do that now or later. Do you want to say? Okay.
Save it for the end, but there's a couple quick comment, or there's a comment or question. Board Member Belknap?
I actually have a question, because why can't we put this in our document that goes out that, but that says that it could affect the student? Why do we have to codify this if we can put that in the information that every parent has to sign and fill out, that if they don't take this, they can't get their pathway?
I believe that's the current practice, and apparently students are still opting out. I don't know if Talia or somebody else is in the office. Oh, would you like to address that? Or you.
So, Talia Longhurst, Career and Technical Education Director, we had that discussion in Assessment, Standards and Assessment Committee. Teachers put it in their disclosure, they talk about it, it's put out in front of people every chance we get, but it still doesn't always result in decisions that are made. And a consequence, maybe that's how I want to say it, a consequence that the student doesn't really understand despite best efforts to educate them.
Okay. Did that answer your question? Okay. Board Member Ellis?
Could you put up a copy of the form that we have? Because I don't think that it, well, it's on the opt-out form that they can opt out. I do not think that it specifies to the degree that Board Member Belknap requested.
I think it does.
Does anybody know where that form is? I could find quickly.
Well, that's coming up. It isn't part of the discussion too, even though where it has been, the unintended consequences that happen there. Well, the parents and the students' perception of what they don't know there's a consequence. And so that's what we're dealing with, is perception after the fact, and then it's like, uh-oh, how come this isn't working? Or how come I'm not getting the full credit, or I'm not taking this pathway because of the opt-out? Isn't that what the biggest concern is while we're having this discussion? So it's coming up.
Oh, yeah. You have it in bold, so.
It's in there. That's what I was going to say. It's very clear.
I think it's clear there. It's clear. And in red, and capitalized.
Pretty clear. Yeah, it's clear. I think it's the current opt-out form.
Chair, would you?
Oh.
I think it's fine.
Board Member Ellis, do I have yours on for a reason?
I don't know, do you want to hear from me?
Well, I could have made a mistake here and put you back on. Okay. Board Member Lear.
A short related question to Talia or Angie, and that is, it has a consequence for the student, but doesn't it also have consequence for the funding? Because if they don't take those tests, then we don't get credit for them taking those tests and passing those skills tests, and that means that our funding is reduced commensurately, is that right?
So
not
there
that direct.
is a big pot of money, and part of the money, as LEAs complete different things to earn that money for their LEA, one of the components is successful completion of skill certification assessments. If a student didn't take that test or pass that test, it just redistributes the pie. It's not that we would lose the dollars, but it redistributes for the LEA. It would be less back to that LEA.
Oh, all right. So it doesn't really, the feds
Doesn't
don't
decrease.
keep our money,
No.
it just
redistributes.
recirculate. Thank you.
Board Member Scott Hansen.
My recollection from our committee discussion was that this was fairly prevalent, that CTE students are opting out of this, and maybe we postulated that maybe the kids who are taking the CTE path are more likely to be opting out of tests in general. I don't know if you can confirm that, or...
Yeah, right now, we don't have any tracking data on that number. I can't tell you exactly what that number is.
And part of our discussion as well was that this is required for certification, but that really is the graduation from the CTE program.
It can be, absolutely.
And another way to look at this, at least from my point of view, is that when kids opt into the CTE program, they should also be opting into completing that program through the final certification test. So I'm all for getting this in legislation, into the code that says CTE, is not required or is not eligible for opt-out.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
So a lot of times, people don't look at the opt-out form until they're ready to opt out of a test, not when they're registering for a course. Do parents have that opportunity to understand at that time that there is going to be a test at the end in order to get the certification, and if they choose not to take that test, that they would not receive, or the class would basically be just good knowledge, but not leading to what the intent of the CTE program is leading towards?
That is a good question. Every LEA does their own version of registration, and we don't have any input onto what that looks like. I can certainly work with our local directors around that issue.
Board Member Lisa Cummins.
So my point goes to what Board Member Cummins stated, in that when a parent looks at that opt-out letter, it says, for graduation, they're thinking RISE, SAGE, opting their child out as a whole, and they're not thinking for certification. So I don't know if it's the wording on there or the lack of stress on the required for certification. So I don't know if there's a misunderstanding there on the parents' part or miscommunication on the LEA's part, but maybe to somehow communicate that. I think that goes to Brittany's discussion of when to let parents know, to emphasize that.
Board Member Earl.
So I was kind of thinking maybe the same thing. I don't know when these are necessarily collected, if they're collected at the first of the year as part of the CT program, or if they're collected right before, not necessarily the certification test, but at some point when other tests are given. But that definitely would probably solve some of that problem. If our schools would be losing the funding if they had several children not take this, even if the pie is redistributed. We have the money, but it would be going other areas. But a school may be losing that money. It would seem like it would be a vested interest to make sure there was clarification on the part of staff members, if someone did mark that, to maybe call and say, are you sure this is what you want? Because this is the program. So I don't know. I don't know if it needs to be in statute or if it's just a further clarification from the LEA themselves, so, or from the, teacher or whatever, so.
Board Member Belknap.
I think it was alluded to that they can't, that why be in CTE? You can take all these CTE courses and not be in a pathway and never take one of these tests, okay? If you choose to be in a pathway and do it, then you would want to take the certification. So Talia, I guess my question, I do have one. My question would be, is there a way that we could help our CTE teachers that once they say they're in the pathway, rather than just taking the beginner class, that we say, to finish this and to have your certification, you will need to take your final test to get that certification? Could we do a better job at the local levels to let them know that, rather than try and codify this?
So generally speaking, a student doesn't walk into a class and say, I'm an explorer or I'm a pathway student. They can take whatever courses they want in any particular order most of the time. I don't know that they identify themselves. Many don't even still, we're working continually on this, many don't even understand what a pathway is. And so that's a dream one day. We will know that and be able to talk to kids about that, and they will understand that, and parents as well.
Okay. No, I love dreams.
I have a dream.
One of the challenges, I just want to dive in while you're on this subject, because I guess I can, because I have the mic, and I haven't weighed in very much on some of these things, is the CTE, our CTE people, as they are, there's a discovery, the pathway people, students, they really perceive in their brain they're on a pathway, and then they find out later, after, what is it, the 2 or 3, I'm trying to remember, I can't speak
3 credits.
CTE very well.
It's 3 credits to be a completer.
Completer, yeah, they're after that completer, and they get halfway into this, and they go, what did I do? And then the parents say, well, what did I do? Because when I talked to parents about this, they said, well, I'm an opt-out parent. I'm not labeling them bad or anything, but I choose opt-out. So whatever it is, I'm opting, but I had no idea that this is the unintended consequence of that decision. So how do I go back? Is there a way to go back? There isn't, and so it's too late. And I said, well, this is kind of the drama, and this is why when we moved this, I can't remember who I was visiting with, it might have been Board Member Ellis and such. I said, well, do we have a problem, and let's get this back in rule to make sure that however it is, whatever it is, that number one, our students, number two, our parents, or maybe it better be parents, and then our students have a clear understanding of the decisions that they're making, and the unintended consequence when it comes to CTE, because there's quite a few people that are really, really disappointed, and this is real important for the next step as they leave, after they're completers, they want to take off into something, and now they're going, oh, I have lost the credentials. I don't have it, which is hurting them and also deflects them from finishing whatever pathway or whatever career that they're wanting to take. So I just wanted to speak to that a little bit. That is really, as I look at this rule, as the rule was coming back, and then also this legislature, is how do we protect ourselves from ourselves, or how do we best serve in the CTE world, because a lot of dollars, a lot of emphasis, and a lot of good quality things are happening in that world. And now we kind of have something that we need to fix. So I'll go back. I'm off my soapbox. Board Member Gravitt?
I've thought a lot about this since our last committee meeting, and I guess I kind of had a change of mind about codifying it because will that make the difference? It's in the opt-out form. It's stated clearly. It's the disclosure statements. Every CTE disclosure statement I've read has talked about the certification. Teachers talk about it, and I guess how many times do we need to say it for it to be understood? And I guess that's my confusion. Why does it need to be in law when will that make the difference? I mean, I've had kids sign disclosure statement, I've had parents sign disclosure statements, but then they say, well, I didn't read it. No, it happens all the time. And then it's like, the administration says, well, they didn't read it, so that doesn't count. And it's just, I guess it's frustrating when you have it all of these places, and you keep putting it in new places. So that's kind of my thought about that, that we have it said, and teachers say it, disclosure statements say it, opt-out forms say it, and ultimately, it has to come back to whether you read it or not.
I didn't realize I was next. And sadly, even if we put it in law, you're still going to face that same issue, and parents coming in and demanding to opt out. I agree that it's a problem if students are taking a course in trying to get a certificate, but I don't necessarily agree that it needs to be put into state law. I think that we can be more clear from the outset in training. And I get that we tried, and you can only do so much, and, that's all you can do. But, so I have a couple of questions. Why can't you go back and take a test? So say I took a course and then I decide, so if we're thinking of a competency-based mindset, why can't I go back and show competency in an area if I had opted out previously? Is there anything really stopping you from doing that?
It becomes a financial issue because there is a cost per test, and the LEAs bear that cost. And so for every student to retake and retake increases that cost to the LEAs.
Okay, but if they didn't take it, and then they're just going back to take it once, then maybe that was already factored in because they assumed that all students would be taking the test. So that's one question I have. The other one is there really a high demand of opt-out students who are then demanding certification? Because what I would hate to do is put into statute that it doesn't apply to the CTE skills, and then you have students like Laura mentioned that are just taking the courses. Some of my kids have CTE certification in like Excel and stuff like that, something that the certification doesn't matter. They got the skill set they needed, and they're never going to use the certificate. And so it wouldn't have mattered had they had the certificate on. But then there's other CTE courses where it's vital if they plan to pursue a career with that. So I get that it's varied, and I'm a fan of the CTE pathways, but I don't see what's stopping someone, if they had opted out, to go back and say, I got a call from a mom with this same issue, saying, wait a minute, they're telling me that if we opt out, we can't get certified. And but then why can't they change their mind and take the test when they find out that you have to?
Just to add to that, there are some industry-based certifications for which you cannot go back. You have to have had coursework and clinicals, work-based learning experiences within a specific amount of time before you're allowed to sit for that.
CTE is pretty large.
It is. That's some, not all.
That's probably a small percentage that have those restrictive of.
It is, but those are probably your most important right-to-work certifications rather than value-added certifications.
I still think that we could just, without putting it into statute, make some changes to our board rule, and as Carol likes to say, train, better so that people understand from the outset what is expected and what you can expect to receive based on your participation. And there has to be some ownership. I mean, we can't just babysit everyone. If they didn't read the disclosure that you sent them a million times, they have to suffer the consequences. I mean, we can't babysit everybody.
Isn't part of, while you're on this test, isn't the test, the state test, part of the end of the coursework? So how is that CTE teacher going to grade that student that doesn't take the test at the end of that coursework?
Because it appears on the opt-out list, it's not allowed to be counted for that coursework, for the grade.
Which is another
both reasons.
Right.
We're in the education business. We have teachers that will grade, and on the CTE part, you test at the end of to see what you've learned, correct?
Correct.
And so is there an alternate test that is how do you?
So generally what would happen in a class is the teacher would give the skill certification exam, which is similar to a comprehensive final exam, if you will, based on the standards of the course. And then because they're not allowed to use that grade on, or the score on the certification assessment, they would then go back and duplicate with their own written final exam. So it would be double testing if you want to consider it that way.
Okay. All right. Board Member Linda Hansen.
Looking at this through a different perspective, I was in standards and assessment when we talked about this. Not everybody knows what certification is or what certification means. So you put on an opt-out form, they're not going to get certification. We don't care if they get their certificate, but then when they go to get a job, that's when the problem is, right? They go to get a job and realize, oh, they needed that for their job. So we need to maybe put something in there required for certification for employment or something like that, to clarify it so that they understand that they may not be able to get a job, the job they want, without the certification.
Board Member Newell, thank you for...
I have to ask the new guy question. Where are the gaps in the communication to letting people know about the parameters of these certifications? I mean, from the very beginning, when the kids sign up for these courses, and the parents, if they're involved, where do the gaps start that we see right now?
That's a great question, and I'm not sure I know all of the answer to that. I think because the certification is not counted for a grade or a score anywhere, it becomes something that's easy to opt out of without understanding those unintended consequences, regardless of how we communicate that. The kids just simply don't understand. It's a chance to not take a test in some cases, and they don't understand the consequence of that.
Okay. So I guess I just don't understand. Isn't there somebody responsible for, be it a counselor or someone that's responsible to guide these students through this process?
So that would be the teachers most often in this particular case. And they do work with them. They do talk about it. They talk about the importance. They stress it. Parents and students make choices.
Do you have a follow-up, or? Board Member Bolter.
Yes, I just need to make a clarification. The certification at the end, it is not part of the coursework. It's not something that has ever been graded, as a matter of fact. And it's just if you want that certification in a welding or in auto shop. And I've had some of my boys go through CTE courses. One just wanted to do the class because they were interested in it. They did not want the certification. So that certification, it's just if you want that certificate. It's not the coursework. My other one went straight through auto mechanics and on to DXATC and got a complete certification in diesel technology. That's the path that he chose. So he did take every single one of those certifications. But to say that a teacher should be able to grade that, that's just kind of a lot of it ridiculous, because it's for that certification at the end.
May I clarify?
Yes.
In statute, there is a requirement, it's been in place for over 25 years, that CTE have a competency-based assessment at the end of every course.
Right, competency-based, but this
Right.
is not that. This is just for the certificate.
We have a competency-based skills certification assessment for nearly every single one of our courses. Some of those include the industry component, others are state-developed certification assessments that shows competency.
Board Member Scott Hansen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that this certification test is a different animal than maybe the SAGE test and some of the other ones that are commonly thought of as opt-out tests. And I'm just wondering, what is the downside of just having this be the comprehensive test at the end of these courses for certification purposes or for assessment of competency purposes for the professor or for the teacher? What's the downside of putting this into?
That's a really great question. As a former classroom teacher in career and technical education, my students can always vote with their feet, if you will. If they don't show up on the day of a test, then their opportunity to take that test many times is gone, especially when it's a state test and you're in a computer lab for that test, other things. I think students and parents always have choices. It becomes whether it's available on an opt-out list or not. That's for you all to decide.
Board Member Ellis?
I know that we're not taking motions right now. I would just suggest that we rearrange the opt-out form, put CTE at the top, provide better training, and for a parent like me who never uses the state thing, I just write an email. You know, I have to take the responsibility if I didn't do my due diligence and find out. So, you know, I see no reason to put it into the statute, as I stated before, but I think that we can take corrective actions here to make sure that there is more and better communication with parents.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Yeah, I think it might be interesting for this conversation to go back to the standards, or back to a committee for discussion, because we keep talking about this test as if it's analogous to the RISE or the ACT Aspire, but is it closer aligned to an AP test at the end of an AP course, which isn't on the opt-out list, because it's the student can take the course and choose for themselves whether or not they want to take it or not. And so I'm just curious if it's not even appropriate for it to be on this opt-out list, but it's part of the course that students choose to take if they want the certification at the end. And so I think maybe if it was back in committee, that could be discussed as to whether or not it should even be on this list.
Can I make one comment?
Board Member Lear? Oh, go ahead.
Motion?
Well, we're not taking motions yet.
Well, it is 2:00, so maybe it should be a motion.
Chair, may I just make
Well,
one?
it is noon. It is 2, I mean, what's that?
Just one comment. If we wait to have it be in a committee discussion, it just means that this year it will not be addressed in legislation. That's the only downside if you think it's something that should be dealt with this session.
Okay.
Okay.
Board Member Lear, we have a couple, so let's stay focused.
In the spirit of that, I would like to move, since it's after 2:00, that you take this discussion back to the sponsor who you have in mind.
That's on.
Now I am. In the spirit of that, I would ask you, and I would make this in the form of a motion, to have you take that back to the sponsor who's interested and see if that sponsor would be willing to work with us, work with the board, see if we can handle it at the board rule level, greater communication, rearranging the form without giving up that possibility for another year. Is that motion something?
You know what,
that makes
I
sense?
think it's after, we're going to run out of time, so I'll take your motion,
Okay.
but let's restate it and try to get it into one, can we
Into 25 words or less.
Yeah.
Ask the USBE staff to work with the sponsor who's interested in this idea.
Not yet.
I thought you said there was a sponsor.
We don't have
They
a
don't even have it.
sponsor.
You just have the idea. the
Yes.
concept.
Do we put it back
Well,
into committee and have more discussion
Then
and not
that's-
act?
So moved. To take it back to committee and have more discussion about
And not
the-
move
the importance of
forward
this.
with this? Second. Okay. We have a motion and a second. And the second is to take this back to committee and not pursue legislation. Discussion to the motion. Board Member Hanson.
No.
None? Oh, I'm sorry, your
I'm doing
light was on.
something else, yeah.
Board Member Belknap.
Done.
Seeing none, let's vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Voting is unanimous. Okay. Is there any other, now we're into the action side of things. Board Member Lear, do you have another?
I think I'm first. Mark?
You think you're done?
No, I'm not done, but I can make another one as a
Linda.
follow-up.
Sorry.
I've got 2. Do you want me to do 2 or just one at a?
Let's do one at a time, please. Okay, will you turn your mic back on? Like one more time. There we go.
Okay. I would move that we support HB 120, student and school safety.
Second.
We have a motion. Is that House Bill 122?
120.
120.
120, sorry. Okay, we have a motion to support House Bill 120. We had a second. What was that second? Did you get it?
Moi.
Okay, discussion? Seeing none, let's vote.
Can I get
All in favor? Hold it. Hang on. I see it. Board Member Belknap, discussion?
I'm sorry, I just needed one piece of clarification. I know that our priority was 30 million and 66 million and I know one time and ongoing. But my question was there anything else in there, Angie, that went against what the board had put forward? That's what I'm missing.
So to answer your question, before the board prioritized the 30 and the 66, they received recommendations from the board's Student Safety Advisory Committee. So all of the background to you making that priority of 30 and 66 was based on the recommendations from the Student Advisory Committee, which were codified in HB 120. So whether or not the 30 and 66 wasn't as detailed, I think, as the recommendations that came from the School Safety Advisory Committee and ultimately what made it in, but it was based on your board advisory group's recommendations that were presented to you in October, that then went to the Education Interim Committee in October, and then Representative Ward has done everything he could to codify that committee's work, which the board seemed to be supportive of at the time. So,
thank you.
Okay, we're still in discussion. Board Member Earl?
Yes, I just want to, I'm going to vote in favor for this. I do have some philosophical issues with some of the directions we're headed, but I do feel like there has been some great dialogue, and I think there is a need for the safety element to this. I am concerned about what we may be using for some of the climate surveys. Specifically, I'm concerned if we're implementing the SHARPs, which it sounds like that may not be the main component here. I'm hoping not. There are some elements to that I'm concerned about. But I'm going to vote for it. There still is some concerns I have over the intrusion into lives of families, but that's what I just want to state.
Not seeing any discussion to the motion. The motion is to continue and move with support on House Bill 120. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, hang on. Board Superintendent.
If I could just address Board Member Earl's comment, one of the things that this board, I don't know if it was voted on or recommended, was that the advisory committee would not stop, but that committee, of which you have, I think, 2 members on, would continue to meet. So that would be a good place for you to continue to have input and for that advisory committee to come back and make recommendations. So I just wanted to remind you of that. I apologize for timing.
Hey.
Means everything in life, sir.
Hey, we are, is there anything out? You sure?
All in favor?
Okay, here we go. The motion before the board is that we support House Bill 120. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Will the ayes raise your hand and be noted? Board Member Earl, Board Member Scott Hansen, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Newell, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Hansen, Board Member Davis, Board Member Cannon, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. The motion passes. Did you get the?
I need
the noes? Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Bolter, Board Member Ellis. Okay.
Can I?
Board Member Davis?
Were you going to say something about that, Bill? I have a new
gonna-
motion.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to make one more motion if you want, or these guys can make it, I don't know. The motion I was going to make is to add Senate Bill 37, the $350,000 of legislative funding on the priority list.
To place?
On our legislative funding priority list. Isn't that what you guys wanted? Yes.
Okay.
Second. So that we could talk about it.
The motion is to move, is it SP 37?
SB 37.
At the amount of $350,000 to our priority list. And then there was a second discussion. Board Member Davis, did you want to speak to this?
Mine was about something different. I thought she was still talking about safety, sorry. I have a new motion.
Me too.
Okay. All right, discussion to the motion. Board Member Ellis.
I'm going to hold out, so I'm going to vote no and wait until we see that chart tomorrow on where all of our funding requests are
Okay.
weighed.
Okay, seeing no more discussion, the motion before the board is to move SP 37 at the amount of $350,000 to our board priority list. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Well, the ayes, well, the no,
She's the only.
can we go no? Whoever knows.
Ayes or nays, raise your hand.
Well, the ayes rate, we can do, let's do it right. Well, the ayes, this is who's taking action. Okay, here we go. Board member, I mean, that's the right way to do it. Board member Earl, board member Scott Hansen, board member Gravitt, board member Lear, board member Newell, board member Belknap, board member Hansen, board member Davis, board member Bolter, board member Cannon, vice chair Brittany Cummins. The nays are, yeah, I got Bolter. So you have two. Okay, motion passes.
Now.
Okay, we are running out of time. I'm not seeing any other.
I had my light on a long time.
I have two.
Okay, I've got Cindy's on. Well, hang on. Let me go to Cindy. Board member Davis.
I move that we support Representative Polson's HB 198 that we previously heard and request that she amend the bill to remove the requirement for the board to publish a summative rating, and I'd like to speak to the motion if possible.
Okay, do we?
Seconds.
Okay, will you repeat that one more time? You have it very well read there. You have it
I
written.
prepared ahead.
We appreciate that.
I move that we support Representative Polson's HB 198, which is the school grade bill, and request that she amend the bill to remove the requirement for the board to publish a summative rating.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Second, board member Lear. Discussion to that motion.
For me?
Please speak to the motion.
Well, first of all, I support that we're getting rid of the letter grade. I think it's high time. But if you read the lines in the bill, it still kind of surprisingly requires like an overall summative. So right now, we have these nice thermometers, we have nice categorical data, and the bill, the line isn't taken out where it still requires an overall indicator. So for example, I think we will still run into the same problem, and media or anyone who's talking about this school will look at this one overall, this school is typical. Well, instead of looking at a list of categorical data as we have now in English language learning, we are this, in something else, we are this. I have visited the current model that we're using this year. I've reviewed it with parent groups, I've reviewed it with educator groups. I have only met with positive remarks about it, and I think adding next year, adding that single indicator back in will be almost just like having a letter grade there.
Okay. Board member Scott Hansen.
I understand the stigma with the single letter grade, and I think we want to get away from that. But if I remember correctly, inside that bill, there's still some areas where a school needs to be ranked in the top 20% or the bottom 5% or something like that, which would require some sort of a summative assessment. Maybe we don't need to publish that, but we still would need to have that number so that we can rank schools for some other portions of that code, I believe.
Okay. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I'd like to speak in favor of the motion because I believe I had similar questions that Board Member Scott Hansen had, but I believe you can remove the summative rating from the bill and still have the points, the accumulated points that would be available. It's similar to what we currently see in this year's report card that could be used for that identification for schools in the bottom 5% for Title I and for the school turnaround program. And so I think we could accomplish what you're talking about, Board Member Hansen, and still remove the actual summative rating portion of the
Publishing of it. We could still calculate.
Calculate, but not finish.
Angie?
Just wanted to clarify, what I think Board Member Davis was stating is taking out the publishing of the summative rating. Whether or not we still calculate a summative rating, we could still do that, but it would be the publishing of it, is what was part of her motion.
Okay. Board Member Lisa?
Just a
Comment.
question to pose, would that be a lack of transparency? And would that would that in any way confuse parents or any LEAs who want to know? Would that be a problem?
Well, we could ask staff
Staff.
here if that would be a problem. Where we're at is, is a problem a grade? What do parents really want to have access to?
Let me just say, I know that some people want to know what the grade is. I don't know, I agree with that the grade needs to be taken off, but they want to know, where their school falls. I don't know.
Defer to Darren Nelson, Assistant Superintendent.
Chair?
Yes.
Assistant Superintendent, Student Learning, Darren Nielsen. To answer that question can be challenging. I've had the same experience that Board Member Davis has had, though, and that is I haven't ran into any groups this year. As you know, this year the school report card doesn't contain an overall grade or an overall rating. You published ratings at the indicator level with a lot of detail associated with those. Total points are still on the main page, the default page at the bottom of that page. So somebody who wants to could add up those points, and in rule it actually tells us where the cuts are for those. But I haven't had any groups tell me that they're missing the grade or an overall rating. And I've had the opportunity on behalf of you as board members to visit with multiple media outlets, including a very conservative radio show, Saturday morning radio show that I expected some resistance to that, and it was received very positively.
Okay. All right. Stay seated, if you would, please. Board Member Cannon?
I'd like to make a motion that we split the vote on this and that we have the ability to vote on supporting Marie Paulson's bill, and that we then separate and have another vote about the summative indicator. Because I feel like I'm really in support of her bill. I have questions about the summative indicator and how that will affect turnaround schools and what I don't know whether other states are doing that kind of thing. There are just questions in my mind about it.
Okay. So your motion here is to split this into two parts. Do we have a second to that motion? Second. Board Member Gravitt, did you get that? Discussion to separating it. I have lights on, so I have Board Member Davis, and are you guys, is this to speak to the split?
No, to the original. Yeah, I was waiting to speak to the original.
Okay. Board Member Ellis, are you speaking to the split? Board Member Earl?
Yes.
Sorry.
That's all right. I feel like it needs to be a component of our original motion. I do think that this is a very strong thing to do for our schools and for our communities. The information is there. I think, I'm going to speak against this. I think we need to keep it together.
Okay. I'm not saying any others, so let's vote. The motion is to split the motion into two parts. One being in support, and then the second part is what will be taken out. So, all those in favor to split, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. We have one aye.
I can tell you who
Okay.
knows.
Did you say? Oh, there's two ayes.
Oh, who's the other eye?
Board Member Jenny, sorry, I didn't hear and I didn't see a hand raising. I apologize. All right. Motion fails. We're back to the original motion, so we're speaking to the original motion, which is, and I'm either Lorraine's going to restate or we'll ask Board Member Davis to do it, but I think we know what it is. Did you want to speak to the original motion, Board Member Davis?
I just wanted to address the Board Member Cummins' question about transparency. I actually think that taking out an overall indicator and leaving the categorical data provides greater transparency and better information for the public.
Okay. Board Member Ellis?
I agree with Board Member Davis, and I'm going to speak in favor of this motion and say hallelujah, it's about time, but we have a lot of work, in my opinion, to be done to peel back the accountability system, because as I've stated many times, I feel like the accountability has shifted to the state instead of to local communities with a lot of this state-level accountability measures. So I'm all in favor of this. I would like to ask one question, though. Would there be something that would prohibit a parent from, even though we haven't published an overall, if, to answer Lisa's question, if someone wrote into the state office, could they find that data, or could they be given that data if they wanted to know an overall ranking?
Yes. Yes, in fact, we published.
Got it.
There we go, sorry about that. Darren Nielsen, Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning. Yes, in fact, many of our LEAs are really interested in being able to get through this complicated calculation to fact check us, to make sure that we haven't made errors, especially when we start talking about our turnaround schools, TSI and CSI schools. So we publish on our website the spreadsheet that contains all that detail. So whether you're somebody who likes to get into the nuts and bolts right down to the weeds of it, or whether you just want to look on the landing page of the report card, scroll to the bottom and add up the points that are listed there by each indicator, you could determine where your school falls. In fact, Cache County, I was surprised, not long after we did school report cards, Cache County published in their local newspaper that one of their schools was the highest performing schools in the state, and I'm like, what? I didn't know that. They very quickly, because it was advantageous for them to do so, very quickly went in, figured that out, and published that information, so.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Belknap?
Yep, I have two things, Chair.
Okay.
Okay, Angie, number one, it would be, what kind of presentation is going to be out there that we support this bill, but without this? How is that going to happen if it never comes out? How is that going to sit with our board that we are supporting this bill, period? I'm curious how it will sit.
Okay. So my understanding of the motion is that we would tell Representative Polson that the board supports her bill, and that in addition to that, if she's so inclined and wants to take the board's recommendation, that she also eliminate the summative. So I guess I'm not quite sure what.
Okay, no, that was my answer.
But she
Okay.
would be able to say that the State Board of Education supports SB 198.
Okay, thank you. Two,
HB.
Okay. Your
call
next
to
one.
question.
Yeah. Do I need to second that?
Okay.
Can I second
We called a question, which is in debate. We're going to vote. Okay, so it's not debatable. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will the ayes raise your hand to be recognized to end debate? Board Member Earl, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Newell, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Hanson, Board Member Davis, Board Member Bolter, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Cannon, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins, which is plenty of. Okay, we ended debate. Right now we are going to the original motion, and I have two choices here. I could have Ms. Lorraine restate it, or, are you ready to restate it?
I can't restate if I can't answer my questions.
Oh, that's all right. We have enough votes. We're fine.
Okay, the motion is that the board support HB 198 and request that the sponsor amend the bill to remove the requirement for the board to publish a summative rating.
Okay, that's the motion before the board. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will the ayes raise your hand? Board Member Earl, Board Member Scott Hanson, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Newell, Board Member Hanson, Board Member Davis, Board Member Bolter, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Janet Cannon, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Motion passes. Okay, Board Member Lear.
Thank you.
Oh, turn yours back on.
Oh, wait, there's someone else.
Nope, there's you.
I'd like to make a motion. I've got two bills also, like Linda. I'd like to make a motion on one first, that the board support HB 208. That is the bill that's sponsored by Representative, all of a sudden I lost her name, Suzanne Harrison, that would provide a small grant program. No, I didn't. There's
Hold
no
it,
action.
hang on. You're going to
so
speak, don't speak to the motion yet. Just, I'll
Okay.
allow you to speak to the motion.
Okay.
Okay.
The bill, again, provides a small grant program for
You're speaking to
LEAs.
you're speaking to the motion.
Well, no, I'm just telling
You're
you
telling
what
what
the
it
bill
is.
about.
So let's, I'll let you speak to the motion. We
Okay.
have to support HP 208.
Okay?
Is there a second? Second. Board Member Lear, will you speak to the motion?
I would love to.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So,
It's all in your motion, and I have to end that
That's
somehow.
all right.
Thank you.
HB, I want to do it right. HB 208 is a small grant program that is very locally based, wherein LEAs can choose what projects they'd like to do to encourage safe walking and biking routes for children to school. And I think this is an excellent idea. It's a very small amount of money. It promotes exercise. It promotes local control. It promotes clean air. And it promotes families walking and exercising together. It has everything to it's a trifecta of wonderful things. So I really hope we can support it.
Okay. Hang on one sec. I got to...
No, let me explain. Yeah, I can explain.
You can keep explaining. I've got to ask a question.
I know, you were wondering. I went to great lengths to check this out ahead of time. There was no position. The board took no position. It voted,
There weren't enough
and there were
votes
not
either way.
enough votes for either position.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
there we go. Now, do I have to say again why this is such a wonderful bill?
Okay.
Okay.
All right. I was not to the last meeting, but I believe this was talked about in the last one.
Clean air,
So,
family togetherness.
so the motion is to support House Bill 208. Speaking to that, anyone want to speak to that motion to
Not
support? If
anymore.
we don't, it's not that we're saying we're not supporting it, it's just we don't
Right.
support it.
We
Okay,
should be.
Board Member Ellis.
I just want to state for the public record that if you want to know why people vote a different way, go back and listen last week to the thing, because I'm not going to rehash all the same
thank
talking points.
Okay. I'm not saying it, I am saying, Board Member Davis.
I'll speak to the motion. I mean, probably the biggest reason to vote for this is to have kids that are safe getting to school. And I learned after, and I hope this data is accurate, that only a third of the LEAs that are applying for these grants to get safe walking routes are able to be accepted because of the funding amounts. And so I think that this is not a huge ask, and it will at least increase some schools. And for those of us who have been through this process, it's hard, and you have to hustle, and you have to really work hard with these agencies to get it done, but it's worth it to have kids who are safe getting to school.
Okay. I'm not saying any other discussion, so we're going to vote on this, to vote to support HB 208. Is that correct? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? No. Will the ayes raise their hands? The ayes raise their hand. There you go. Last chance to bring your hand down, because you're going to get called out. Okay, Board Member Scott Hansen, Board Member Gravitt, Board Member Lear, Board Member Newell, Board Member Belknap, Board Member Hansen, Board Member Davis, Board Member Lisa Cummins, Board Member Janet Cannon, Vice Chair Brittany Cummins. Motion passes.
I had one more,
Okay.
if that's okay.
Next bill.
I'd like to move that the board supports the concept. This is mirroring our board member Belknap, but support the concept of HB 71. Superintendent Dixon mentioned that this is under revision and discussion, and I think that supporting the concept of clarifying the information that teachers can teach would be a really positive thing. And that was Representative Ward's effort in this bill, and I think it would still be a really meaningful effort for legislation. And there were a number of people who testified at the hearing that there are teachers.
Board member, board member,
can't.
you're.
That's the bill.
That's a very
Now I have
long
to speak to the
motion.
bill. Again, my
But
speech
I'm
was
back
great,
to,
but-
we, in here, we either support HB 71
Right.
or not, but I think and it didn't get out of committee.
But I'm asking to support the concept,
Okay, well,
which apparently it's coming back, so I'd love to get out in front of this for a change.
okay, is there a second? Okay, discussion to supporting the concept of House Bill 71.
Now can I speak to it?
Do you want to speak? You have more to speak to that?
I have just a very little more to speak to this.
Okay, thank you.
That there were a number of comments that teachers do misunderstand, the teachers are afraid of providing instructional information, that there is a lack of clarity. This is not a pretend or a made-up idea or issue, and if greater understanding and clarity and comfort could be brought to teachers to provide information, that would be a really great thing. So I'd like to support the concept of House Bill 71 in bringing that clarity to the state code.
Okay.
And we'll have to address the bill itself if it comes out.
Okay, thank you for speaking to your motion. Okay, discussion to that motion, Board Member Earl?
I think the clarity needs to be part of the process. And it sounded to me that there are, if there's an uncertainty or there's concern, that we need to look at what we're providing. This is not something that needs to be legislated. I think the things that are in there already are adequate. But if there's clarification, I definitely think it needs to come here. I don't think it was brought here last year, and yet we have this bill that shows up, and I think it's a process thing. I think maybe more communication. I would welcome Representative Ward coming and discussing some things with us versus us always codifying things, so that's mine.
Okay.
I would be voting against this.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Could I just get a review on what this bill does? What are some of the changes? Sorry, I don't have a recollection of it. Do you want to speak to it?
Angie, or?
Focus on the advocacy of it and encourage.
Or
staff.
who wants to
Yeah,
speak to it
Jeff
from
will.
staff?
Introduce yourself.
Okay.
Jeff Van Holten, Policy Advisor for State Board. I will do my best to speak to the elements of this bill. I have a lot of bills in my head right now, and this was not at the top of the list. But the primary element was delineating the difference between advocacy for the use of contraceptives versus teaching that there are contraceptives. And the idea of this bill, as I understand it, is to clarify what is already allowed. This does not create new requirements. It does not create new permission. It simply clarifies all of the mystery behind the discussion of contraceptives and does not allow for the advocacy of, which has always been prohibited. Does that help clarify?
Do you have a follow-up, Brittany? Okay. Board Member Belknap?
Thank you. I guess my question is, I don't really understand why this needs to be in code. If it's already part of the standards and it's already in rule, why does it need to be codified? Do you have an answer to that? Sorry. Sure. Yeah.
So, and again, this is the statements that were made in committee yesterday. The reasoning for this is essentially there are teachers who are not teaching any element of contraceptives, even though it is allowed in the standards, because they fear for their jobs in terms of the consequence of if we talk about this and we're not sure where the line is, I don't know if I'll cross it and then get in trouble. And so they want the line to be drawn in code so it's clear for everybody where
Well, then
that is.
that's not they're not very well trained then, because it's already, the line is drawn.
Board Member Davids?
Never mind. I'm frantically reading the bill. I probably don't have enough information to vote yes or no, honestly.
Board Member Bolter?
Yeah, I was just going to make the same point that Board Member Belknap brought up, was that it's already in the standards, that you can discuss that, and it's in the rule. So for teachers to say that they don't feel like they could talk about it, that doesn't make sense to me, and it doesn't make sense why it should we need to put this in, and that was a lot of what some of the legislators had brought up, was that it's already part of our standards. This is being discussed, and so,
Okay.
yeah, I'm going to vote no.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins?
Sorry, just one quick question. So currently, there's aspects of sex education that an LEA basically chooses and puts on their list of things that they will opt into. Is that correct? And so this doesn't change any of that? This just clarifies in statute what the ability of a teacher to speak to contraception. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Scott Hansen?
So maybe you can help me. Just a question, Chair. It sounds like we have the latitude right now to provide some more clear direction as far as curriculum, just from the board under the current statute. Is that correct?
Can I speak to this? Yes, you're correct. And what we've heard from our staff is that it's not about our training, our communication, or what's actually allowed. It's the discussion between a teacher and maybe a parent, and the confusion there when two people who aren't lawyers are having a conversation about what does advocacy or encourage mean, or parents not feeling, or teachers not feeling like they understand what that line is. As you know, oftentimes certain terms are fairly loaded, and two reasonable adults can differ. They can have different interpretations of that same thing. So that's just anecdotally what we've heard. Teachers reached out to Representative Ward on this, but we do provide training to Board Member Belknap's statement. On our end, our staff works very hard to help teachers feel comfortable and understand what that line looks like, but it doesn't stop those conversations between teachers and parents and other things that we can't really control. Yeah.
Just follow up, Chair.
Okay, follow up.
So, given that, this is one where I believe that I'll be pulling back, not looking to put this in code, but maybe to get some more dialogue going and do something here where we can identify those terms that may be loaded and provide some definitions and maybe beef up our training a little bit to address the teachers' concerns. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the table, and we still have several board members that have comments. I'm hoping they're questions, because we're running out of time here. Or questions or comments besides taking a position on this particular rule. Board Member Lear?
And mine is not a question, it's just it is a comment that I am a fan of training. I'm not a fan of putting things in the code. So this is kind of contrary to the things I usually am in favor of, but I have heard from so many teachers for so long that their concern is real, their lack of understanding is real, and I want to emphasize that it's not just health teachers, it's science teachers, it's sometimes in the context of an English discussion. So to just say we train health teachers is not adequate. And even if we assumed that our training was as robust and as thorough as we'd like it to be. So I think that in this case, this is such a very important topic. We certainly have we have data that our children are very sexually active, and they are, we certainly have this problem in abundance in Utah. So I really wish that we could help teachers provide information. And I think there is a lack of clarity, to use Laura's word, that needs to be rectified. And I think doing it in code this time makes sense. But that's only a support of the concept. I would want to see what those words look like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Board members, there's still several that want to comment on this. I just want to remind you, we have a study session that's coming up. We have quite a few guests here to want to participate in that. We've cut into their time, and then we also have USDB right after the study session. So I'm still going to recognize board members that have any questions or comments, but please let's keep them brief and to the point so we can take action on this issue. Board Member Belknap.
I actually have a question, and it's going to Lorraine. So, Ms. Lorraine, what can we do? Because going back to Cindy's comment, she hasn't had time to read this. How does it compare to our rule? Is there a way we can table this and pick this back up? I'd really like to see us look at legislative items as they're presented so we have more clarity on them. So what can we do?
You can make a motion to postpone, and then postpone, time certain, or postpone, and it can still come back.
I would like to make a motion to postpone so we can have more opportunity to read through this and get full clarity on it.
Is there a second?
Second. So next week is till next year?
Make it so wet. She needs to say
I think we can get it.
Tomorrow? How about tomorrow?
It'll be tomorrow. Postpone till,
During our legislative thing tomorrow.
yes, during our legislative discussion tomorrow. So the motion is to postpone until tomorrow's legislative discussion. And we have a second discussion to that motion to postpone. Board Member Earl?
I'm not speaking to that motion. so
Oh, okay, your
I'll
light was
speak to
on.
Well, it
Okay.
is, but yeah.
All right.
Previous one.
All right. Well, I'm going to turn your light off because you're not speaking to this one, but you'll have to turn it back on. Okay. All right. Not seeing any discussion. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Did I hear any? We have one no? Okay. Board Member Hanson. Okay. Motion passes as postponed. Board Member Earl.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but each LEA has their own, they make a decision on what they use. Who we addressing here?
No, go ahead and ask your
Okay,
question.
so
Sorry.
they make a decision on what they use. Some schools are abstinence-based, some are abstinence-only, and so the things that they would be teaching would be unique to that district. Is that correct?
Hi, I'm Jody Kaufman. I'm the health specialist for the State Board. Yes and no. So yes, their curriculum is chosen locally, and that's by a board that has at least an equal number of parents as school staff. And that local board makes a decision and approves all curriculum, so guest speakers, videos, text, even down to PowerPoint slides.
Right.
But the standards are set here at this agency, so they can't be more comprehensive than our standards. They can be more restrictive.
Right, so if something is talked about and there's uncertainty, for example, if they're not sure what advocacy means, but they know what program they're using in their LEA, there's no reason why that form is not set. The form they send home for parents to sign to check the boxes, right? It can be added to?
The form cannot be changed.
Can it not be clarified? Can a district clarify, this is what program we're using, this is what we will be talking about? They can't do that? I thought an LEA would have the ability to do that. Is that inaccurate?
Would you like me to answer that?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, will you give a
Sorry.
really short
Yes.
answer, and if you're not
Yes, I will
ready,
give
we
a
can
very
bring
short
it back.
We can have that.
bring this
Parental
back
consent form is a
tomorrow.
board-approved document. It cannot be altered. An LEA may add like a letter but then one of the check boxes, a parent can see every piece of instruction that teacher will use.
Right, and, okay, I will continue this conversation later, so thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. We're going to take a 8-minute break. We're going to be back here at 5 to 3. We're running late. We've got to try to catch up, so thank you.
We've just cut an hour study session down to 10 minutes.
No, it's 3:15. You have to 3:15.
Right.
I know, well, nobody
You
wants
cut it
to.
to half an hour. Yeah, you're right.
Nobody wants, people have their own agenda and they don't want
This is why.
Having fun?